Okay, picture this. What if Naruto got dealt the most insanely overpowered hand in ninja history? I'm talking dual reincarnation of both Otsutsuki brothers. Yeah, you heard that right. Hamura's Tenseigan letting you mess with gravity and see across dimensions, plus Ashura's solar chakra and that unbreakable will. That's not just broken, that's accidentally tear holes in reality while making ramen levels of ridiculous. The kid would be walking around with moon-controlling powers and the ability to make friends with his enemies. So naturally, we had to explore what happens when this cosmic anomaly starts attracting attention from things that make Kaguya look like a warm-up boss. This story goes from Chunin exam awakening to literally reshaping how the entire universe handles conflict. Hit that like if you're ready for some reality-bending chaos, and let's see how our favorite knucklehead handles being the bridge between worlds. The arena fell silent. Naruto stared up at Neji Hyuga, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. The prodigy stood there like some untouchable statue, arms crossed, those pale eyes looking down at him with the kind of pity that made Naruto's stomach burn. "You cannot defeat fate, Naruto Uzumaki," Neji said, his voice carrying that infuriating calm. "A failure will always be a failure. That is your destiny." "Shut up," Naruto's voice cracked as he shouted. "I don't care what you say about destiny. I'm gonna prove you wrong." In the stands, Hinata watched with her hands pressed against the railing, her knuckles matching Naruto's. She tried so hard against her cousin, fought with everything she had, and still he'd called her weak. Worthless, just like he was doing to Naruto now. But there was something different about the way Naruto stood there. Something that made even Kakashi lean forward slightly. Neji activated his Byakugan without ceremony. The veins around his eyes bulged as his vision shifted, revealing the flow of chakra through Naruto's body. What he saw should have been simple, the chaotic, massive chakra of the Nine-Tails container, wild and unfocused as always. Instead, Neji's breath caught. There was something else there, something that shouldn't exist. What? Neji's composure cracked just slightly. The chakra system he was looking at didn't make sense. Yes, the fox's red chakra was there, violent and barely contained. But underneath it, woven through it like silver threads through red cloth, was something completely different. Something that felt ancient and cold and impossibly vast. Something that felt like moonlight. Naruto charged forward, his usual graceless assault, but as he moved, something flickered behind his eyes. For just an instant, his vision doubled. He was still running across the arena floor, but he was also somewhere else entirely. He stood on a barren landscape under a sky full of stars. The ground beneath his feet was gray dust, and hanging above him like a massive silver eye was Earth itself. This was the moon, but not empty like he'd always been told. There were structures here, ancient and beautiful, carved from white stone that seemed to glow with its inner light. And there was someone else with him. The figure was tall, with long white hair that moved in the non-existent breeze. His eyes were pale, not quite the white of the Byakugan, but something similar, something older. When he turned to look at Naruto, there was sadness in those eyes. Deep, endless sadness. "You carry such a heavy burden," the figure said, his voice echoing strangely in the airless space. "Both of our burdens now." "Who are you?" Naruto tried to ask, but no sound came out in the vacuum. The figure smiled sadly. "You know who I am, you've always known, haven't you? In your dreams, when you look up at the night sky and feel that pull you can't explain." The vision shattered. Naruto stumbled, his charge faltering as reality crashed back around him. He was in the arena again, Neji was right there, and everyone was staring at him like he'd lost his mind. "Naruto," Sakura called from the stands, "what are you doing?" But Hiashi Hyuga wasn't watching Naruto's stumble. His Byakugan was active, had been since the match started, and what he saw made his blood run cold. For just a moment, when the boy had stumbled, his eyes had changed. Not the red slits of the Nine-Tails, something else entirely. Something that shouldn't be possible. Neji recovered first, his confusion masked behind his usual arrogance. "Distracted already? This is why failures like you." I said, "Shut up." This time when Naruto moved, there was something different about him. His movements were still clumsy, still untrained, but there was a weight behind them now. Like gravity itself was bending slightly in his direction. Their first clash was brutal and brief. Neji's gentle fist technique should have ended it. His strikes landed perfectly, closing off Naruto's chakra points with surgical precision. But as his palms connected with Naruto's body, Neji felt something that made him jerk back in shock. The chakra didn't behave right. Where his strikes should have sealed the pathways, that strange silver energy simply flowed around the blockages like water around stones. And underneath it all, he could swear he felt something vast and patient watching him. Naruto hit the ground hard, gasping, but he was already trying to get back up. Not done yet. Impossible, Neji breathed. I sealed your chakra points. You shouldn't be able to. Yeah, well, I never was good at following rules. As Naruto struggled to his feet, that strange vision flickered at the edges of his mind again. The man with white hair was there, standing beside him now, and this time Naruto could hear him clearly. The chakra of the moon flows differently than the chakra of Earth, the figure said softly. It doesn't follow the same paths. Doesn't obey the same limitations. I don't understand, Naruto gasped, not sure if he was talking to his opponent or the voice in his head. You will. When you're ready, you will. In the stands, Jiraiya frowned. There was something about Naruto's chakra signature that felt off. Not wrong, exactly, but layered. Like there were harmonies playing underneath the main melody that his senses could barely detect. Neji attacked again, more aggressively this time, his pride stung by Naruto's impossible resilience. His gentle fist strikes came faster, more precise, targeting every chakra point he could reach. But each time his attacks landed, that strange energy simply adapted, flowed, found new paths. It was like trying to stop the tide with a net. This is impossible, Neji snarled, his calm facade finally cracking. You're nothing special, just a failure who, stop calling me that. When Naruto roared, something in the arena changed. The air itself seemed to thicken, and several people in the stands felt a strange tugging sensation, like they were being pulled gently toward the center of the arena. In the Hokage's box, Sarutobi's eyes widened as his experienced senses detected a chakra signature unlike anything he'd felt before. For just an instant, Naruto's eyes flashed. Not red like the Ninetales, but a pale, ethereal blue-white that seemed to contain depths like looking into a clear night sky. Neji saw it. Saw those impossible eyes, felt the strange gravitational pull, and for the first time in his life, the genius of the Hyuga clan felt genuinely afraid. Then it was over. Naruto's eyes returned to their normal blue, the strange pressure in the air faded, and he collapsed to one knee, breathing hard. What was that? He whispered to himself. But the voice in his head was gone, and the vision of the moon had faded, leaving only questions and the growing certainty that something inside him was waking up. Something that had been sleeping for a very, very long time. Neji stood frozen, his Byakugan still active, staring at the boy who shouldn't exist. The chakra he was seeing defied everything he'd been taught about how the human body worked. It was like Naruto contained not one but two completely different energy systems, and they were starting to resonate with each other. In the stands, Hiyashi Hyuga felt his hands begin to shake. He'd seen those eyes before, but only in the most ancient texts hidden in the deepest vaults of his clan's library. Eyes that belonged to legends. Eyes that belonged to someone who was supposed to be dead for over 1,000 years. Eyes that belonged to Hamura Otsutsuki. The match continued, but everyone who was watching closely knew that something fundamental had just changed. They might not understand what it was yet, but the boy in the arena was no longer quite the same person who had walked into it. And far away, on the surface of the moon itself, something ancient stirred in its slumber, responding to a call that had echoed across the void between worlds. The first seal was breaking. Naruto wiped blood from his lip and grinned up at his opponent, still completely unaware that he'd just set in motion events that would reshape the very fabric of reality. Come on, Neji, he said, settling into his fighting stance. I'm just getting started. But in his eyes, just for a moment, starlight flickered. 3 days had passed since the preliminaries, and Naruto still couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He'd noticed it first at Ikaraku's the night after his match with Neji. That prickle between his shoulder blades, the sense of eyes boring into him from somewhere he couldn't see. When he turned around, there was nothing there except the usual evening crowd of villagers going about their business. But the feeling hadn't gone away. Now he was walking through the training grounds, trying to work off the restless energy that had been building up inside him ever since that weird moment in the arena. Every time he closed his eyes, he could still see that strange place, all gray dust and impossible structures under an earth-filled sky. And that man with the sad eyes. Naruto Uzumaki. The voice came from behind him, formal and commanding. Naruto spun around to find Hiyashi Hyuga standing at the edge of the clearing, his white robes pristine despite the dusty training ground. The clan head's pale eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made Naruto's skin crawl. Hey there, Hinata's dad. Naruto scratched the back of his head, trying to look casual even though his heart had just kicked into overdrive. "What's up?" Hiyashi didn't answer immediately. Instead, he activated his Byakugan, those veins bulging around his eyes as he studied Naruto's chakra system with the same focus a scholar might use to examine an ancient text. What he saw there made his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "We need to talk," Hiyashi said finally, "privately." The way he said it wasn't a request. Naruto wanted to argue, wanted to demand to know what this was about, but something in the older man's expression stopped him. There was something there that looked almost like fear, and that was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "Okay," Naruto said slowly. "Talk about what?" "Not here." Hiyashi's eyes swept the training ground, checking for observers. "The Hyuga compound, there are things you need to see." 20 minutes later, Naruto found himself following Hiyashi through corridors he'd never imagined existed. The Hyuga compound was bigger than he'd thought, with sections that seemed to stretch back like they'd been built centuries ago. The walls here were different from the main house, older stone, covered in carvings that hurt to look at directly. "Where are we going?" Naruto asked, his voice echoing strangely in the narrow hallway. "To the archives," Hiyashi replied without turning around, "to see records that have been sealed for over 1,000 years." They stopped in front of a massive door covered in sealing tags so complex that Naruto's eyes watered trying to follow the patterns. Hiyashi began removing them one by one, his movements precise and ritualistic. "Why are you showing me this?" Naruto asked. "I mean, no offense, but your clan isn't exactly known for sharing secrets with outsiders." Hiyashi paused, his hand hovering over one of the final seals. "Because you may not be an outsider at all." The door opened with a grinding sound that spoke of great age and greater weight. Beyond it lay a circular chamber carved from white stone that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The walls were covered in murals that depicted scenes Naruto didn't recognize, figures with pale eyes standing beneath a full moon, battles fought in the void between worlds, a great tree whose branches reached across the cosmos. But it was the statue in the center of the room that made Naruto's breath catch. The figure was tall and elegant, carved from the same white stone as the walls. His hair fell in long waves around his shoulders, and his eyes, even rendered in stone, seemed to hold depths that went on forever. There was something familiar about his face, something that tugged at memories Naruto was sure he'd never made. "Hamura Otsutsuki," Hiyashi said quietly, "the younger brother of the Sage of Six Paths. The first to possess the Byakugan, the founder of our clan." Naruto circled the statue slowly, that sense of familiarity growing stronger with each step. "Okay, so he's your ancestor. What does that have to do with me?" Instead of answering directly, Hiyashi moved to one of the wall murals. This one showed the same figure standing on what was clearly the moon's surface, his hands raised toward Earth. Around him, strange energies swirled in patterns that reminded Naruto uncomfortably of the chakra he'd seen in his vision. The official history says that Hamura chose to guard the moon, to watch over the sealed body of the Ten Tails, and ensure it could never threaten the world again, Hiyashi began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting from memory. But that's not the complete truth. He moved to another section of the mural, this one showing the same figure but surrounded by darkness, as if something vast and hungry was reaching for him from the spaces between stars. Hamura didn't just guard the moon, he guarded against something far worse, something that his brother's victory over their mother had attracted, entities from beyond our world who saw Earth as a prize to be claimed. Naruto felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of entities?" "The Otsutsuki clan's true masters," Hiyashi said grimly. "Beings of such power that even Kaguya fled from them in terror. Hamura knew they would come eventually, drawn by the chakra tree's death and the power that had been released. So he made a choice." The next panel showed Hamura standing alone in space, his body dissolving into light that spread across the void like a net. He scattered his soul across time itself, creating a barrier that would hide our world from their sight. But such a technique came with a price. His consciousness was fragmented, his power sealed away, waiting for the day when it would be needed again. Naruto's mouth felt dry. "And you think, what, that I'm connected to this somehow?" Hiyashi turned to face him fully, and for the first time since they'd entered the chamber, his controlled expression cracked slightly. 3 days ago, I watched you manifest chakra that shouldn't exist in any human body. I saw your eyes change to match patterns described only in our most ancient texts. And I felt a gravitational distortion that our records say only one person in history has ever been able to create." The older man stepped closer, his Byakugan activating again as he studied Naruto with uncomfortable intensity. Tell me, Naruto Uzumaki, have you been having dreams lately? Dreams of a place where the earth hangs in the sky like a blue star? Naruto's heart hammered against his ribs. How did you? Because every Hyuga child learns the signs, Hiashi said quietly. We've been watching for them for generations, waiting for the day when Hamura's scattered soul would begin to coalesce. We just never expected it to happen in someone who wasn't of our blood. The chamber seemed to spin around Naruto. He reached out to steady himself against the nearest wall, and his hand landed on one of the carved symbols. The moment his skin made contact with the stone, light blazed through the chamber. The murals came alive. Suddenly, Naruto wasn't just looking at static images anymore. He was watching events unfold like he was standing right there. He saw Hamura and Hagoromo as young men working together to seal their mother. He watched Hamura's journey to the moon, saw him build the great structures that had appeared in Naruto's vision. And then he saw the darkness between worlds stir, drawn by the massive expenditure of chakra that Kaguya's defeat had created. Things that had no names, no forms that human minds could properly process, turning their attention toward the small blue world that had suddenly blazed so brightly in their awareness. He watched Hamura make his terrible choice, watched him scatter his very essence across the fabric of reality itself to hide Earth from their sight. But even as the barrier took hold, Naruto could see that it wasn't permanent. It was more like a shell around a growing egg, and eventually something would have to hatch. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Naruto gasping on his knees in the now dim chamber. The seal is weakening, Hiashi said, his voice barely above a whisper. After 1,000 years, Hamura's sacrifice is finally reaching its limits, and when it fails completely, those things will find us, Naruto finished, the knowledge somehow already there in his mind like it had always been waiting for him to remember it. Yes, unless, Hiashi hesitated, looking older than Naruto had ever seen him. Unless his power can be properly awakened and wielded by someone capable of renewing the barrier. Someone who carries not just his chakra, but his will. Naruto struggled to his feet, his legs still shaky from whatever had just happened to him. And you think that someone is me? I think you may be our only hope, Hiashi admitted. But the power you're beginning to manifest, it's dangerous, Naruto, not just to you but to everyone around you, if it awakens too quickly without proper control. He gestured to the murals around them, and Naruto saw panels he'd missed before. Images of the moon cracking, of tidal waves consuming continents, of the very fabric of space-time warping under stresses it wasn't meant to bear. The last person who tried to force Hamura's awakening nearly destroyed both Earth and the moon in the process, Hiashi said quietly. That was 300 years ago. We've been more careful since then. Great, Naruto muttered, running his hands through his hair. So I'm apparently the reincarnation of some legendary guy. There are cosmic monsters waiting to eat our planet, and if I screw up learning to use these powers, I might accidentally blow up the world. Did I miss anything? Despite the gravity of the situation, Hiyashi's mouth twitched slightly. You're also now technically a member of the Hyuga clan by spiritual inheritance, which means you outrank most of our elders. Naruto blinked. Wait, what? The murals recognize you, Hiashi explained. They only respond to those carrying Hamura's bloodline or his reincarnated soul, since you clearly aren't related to us by blood. Oh, come on, Naruto threw his hands up in exasperation. I can't even get the villagers to stop glaring at me for carrying the 9 tails, and now you're telling me I'm secretly ninja royalty or something. Something like that, yes. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had been revealed settling between them like a physical presence. Finally, Naruto looked up at the statue of Hamura, studying that familiar yet strange face. What happens now? He asked. Now you have a choice, Hiashi said carefully. You can try to suppress this awakening, to push these new memories and abilities back down where they came from. It might work for a while, but eventually the pressure will become too great, and when it finally breaks free, everything goes boom, Naruto said flatly. Everything goes boom, Hiashi confirmed. Or you can accept what you're becoming and let me help you learn to control it. The path won't be easy and there will be complications. What kind of complications? Hiyashi's expression grew even more serious. The other villages will eventually sense the change in your chakra signature. Some will see you as a threat to be eliminated. Others will try to capture and use you. And there are certain individuals who will realize what your awakening means for the barriers that have protected our world. You mean they'll know the cosmic horror things are coming? Yes. And some of them will decide that the solution is to surrender you to those entities in exchange for being spared themselves. Naruto felt that familiar fire building in his chest, the one that always flared up when someone suggested he should give up or give in. Let them try. I didn't become a ninja to hide from fights. This isn't just about fighting, Naruto, Hiashi warned. The power you're inheriting. It doesn't just change what you can do, it changes who you are. The memories, the personality fragments, the knowledge of things that happened before you were born, all of that becomes part of you. Some people lose themselves completely in the process. Naruto thought about that for a long moment, remembering the sadness in the eyes of the figure from his vision. Then he thought about Hinata, about how she'd tried so hard against Neji despite being afraid, about how she'd never given up, even when everything seemed hopeless. Then I guess I'll just have to be stronger than that, he said finally. If this power can protect people, if it can keep those things away from Earth, then I have to learn to use it. That's what it means to be Hokage, right? For the first time since they'd entered the chamber, Hiashi smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible, but it was there. Very well, he said. But we'll need to be careful about how we proceed. There are others who need to know about this development, but the information must be shared carefully. The wrong person learning about your true nature could trigger conflicts we're not prepared for. Others like who? The Hokage, certainly. Your sensei and, Hiashi hesitated, my daughter. Naruto felt heat rise in his cheeks. Hinata, why does she need to know? Because the awakening of Hamura's power will have effects on all of his bloodline descendants, Hiashi explained. She and the rest of the clan will begin experiencing changes as well. Stronger Byakugan, new techniques, enhanced physical abilities. She deserves to understand why. As if summoned by their conversation, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Hiashi quickly moved to replace the ceiling tags on the door, but not before a familiar voice called out. Father, are you down here? I felt something strange. Hinata appeared in the doorway, her pale eyes wide as she took in the ancient chamber and the two men standing within it. Her gaze lingered on Naruto, and for a moment, something flickered in her expression, recognition, perhaps, or maybe just confusion. Hinata, Hiashi said carefully, come in. There are things you need to know. As she entered the chamber, the carved symbols on the walls began to glow again, responding to her presence just as they had to Naruto's. But this time, the light was different, softer, more controlled, like moonlight reflecting off still water. Naruto watched her face as she studied the murals, saw the moment when understanding began to dawn in her eyes. And for the first time since this whole crazy situation had started, he didn't feel quite so alone. Whatever was coming, whatever he was becoming, at least he wouldn't have to face it by himself. The first seal might be breaking, but maybe, just maybe, that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The Valley of the End looked different under the blood-red sky of sunset. Naruto stood at the base of Hashirama's statue, his fists clenched so tight his nails were drawing blood from his palms. Across the churning water, Sasuke perched on Madara's stone head like some kind of dark angel, the curse mark's influence making his skin look gray and mottled. You don't have to do this, Naruto called out, his voice cracking with desperation. Whatever Orochimaru promised you, whatever you think you need to get stronger, we can find another way. Sasuke's laugh was bitter and sharp. Another way? You mean your way, don't you? The way where I smile and pretend that everything's fine while my brother's killer walks free. Itachi isn't the enemy here, Naruto shot back. There's something else going on, something we don't understand yet. If you just listen. Enough! The word hit like a physical blow, carrying with it chakra so dark and twisted that the water between them actually recoiled. When Sasuke looked up, his eyes were no longer black. The three tamo of his Sharingan spun lazily in crimson pools that seemed to reflect depths far greater than any 14-year-old should possess. I'm done listening, Sasuke said, his voice cold as winter stone. I'm done with your naive dreams about friendship and redemption. I'm done pretending that bonds are anything more than chains that hold you back from real power. He leaped from the statue's head, chakra crackling around him like black lightning. The curse mark spread across his skin in intricate patterns, transforming him into something that looked barely human. Naruto felt that familiar fire ignite in his chest, but this time it was different, hotter, deeper. Like something vast and ancient was stirring in the depths of his soul. Fine, he said quietly, settling into a fighting stance, if that's how it has to be. They moved at the same time. The clash was immediate and brutal. Sasuke's speed had increased dramatically under the curse mark's influence, his movements flowing like liquid shadow as he struck with precision that should have ended the fight in seconds. But somehow, impossibly, Naruto was keeping up. Not just keeping up, he was moving like he'd been fighting at this level his entire life. Each time Sasuke's attacks came close to connecting, Naruto seemed to simply not be there anymore. His body flowed around the strikes like water around stones, and when he counterattacked, there was a weight behind his movements that made the very air ripple. "What the hell?" Sasuke snarled, his Sharingan spinning faster as he tried to track Naruto's movements. "How are you?" His words cut off abruptly as his enhanced vision caught something that made his blood run cold. For just an instant, as Naruto dodged a particularly vicious strike, Sasuke could see through him. Not literally, but his Sharingan was showing him something impossible. There were two chakra signatures overlapping in Naruto's body. Two distinct souls occupying the same space, and one of them was older than anything Sasuke had ever sensed. Older and sadder and carrying a weight that felt like it could crush mountains. "Naruto," Sasuke breathed, his attack faltering. "What are you?" But Naruto wasn't listening anymore. The strange doubling in his vision was getting worse, and with each passing second, he could feel something vast and patient stirring in the back of his mind. Memories that weren't his own were bleeding through images of battles fought in the void between worlds, of sacrifices made to protect things that would never know they needed protecting. "You're fighting him wrong," a voice whispered in his thoughts. Not the Nine Tails, this was something else entirely. Something that felt like moonlight and ancient sorrow. "He's lost in darkness. You need to show him the light." "I don't know how," Naruto gasped, barely dodging another of Sasuke's strikes. "The same way I did all those years ago. The same way I've been doing for 1,000 years, watching over this world from the spaces between spaces." Suddenly Naruto understood. The pull he'd always felt when looking at the night sky, the dreams of standing on gray dust under an earth-filled void, they weren't dreams at all. They were memories. And the power that had been slowly awakening inside him wasn't just the Nine Tails chakra, it was something far older. When Sasuke attacked again, Naruto didn't dodge. Instead, he reached out with both hands, and the world around them changed. The water between the statues began to rise, pulled upward by forces that had nothing to do with wind or current. Loose stones lifted from the valley floor, rotating slowly in complex orbital patterns. And above them both, the setting sun seemed to dim as if something vast was passing between it and the earth. "Impossible," Sasuke whispered, his Sharingan showing him energies that defied everything he knew about chakra. The gravitational field Naruto was unconsciously generating was so powerful it was actually bending light, creating halos of distorted air that made the entire valley look like it was underwater. Naruto's eyes had changed again, but not to the red slits of the Nine Tails. Instead, they blazed with pale blue-white light that seemed to contain infinite depths. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in frequencies human ears weren't meant to detect. "I won't let you go," he said, and the words seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I won't let the darkness take you, not like it took so many others." The gravitational distortions intensified. Water rose in impossible spirals around them both, and Sasuke found himself fighting not just Naruto, but the fundamental forces of reality itself. Every movement required tremendous effort as the warped spacetime around them made simple actions feel like trying to run through molasses. "Stop this!" Sasuke shouted, pouring more chakra into his curse-marked transformation. His skin darkened further, and wing-like appendages erupted from his back as he pushed the forbidden power to its limits. "I don't want your help. I don't need your friendship, all I need is power." But even as he said it, his Sharingan was showing him things he didn't want to see. The two souls overlapping in Naruto's body weren't fighting each other, they were in perfect harmony, working together toward a single goal. And that goal was protecting him, even if it meant destroying themselves in the process. "You idiot," Sasuke whispered, and for just a moment his voice cracked. "Don't you understand? I'm trying to save you from me. The things I'm going to have to do, the person I'm going to have to become, you can't follow me down that path." Naruto's expression softened, and for an instant the gravitational distortions lessened. "Then don't go down it at all. Stay here, stay with us. We'll find another way to get stronger together." For a heartbeat, Sasuke almost believed it was possible. Almost believed that there could be a path forward that didn't require him to sacrifice everything he'd once cared about on the altar of revenge. Then Itachi's words echoed in his memory. "You lack hatred. Your hatred is not strong enough." The moment shattered. "There is no other way," Sasuke said, and the curse mark's power exploded outward like a dark star going supernova. The clash that followed was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. Sasuke's Chidori met Naruto's Rasengan at the center of the valley, but this wasn't the simple collision of two A-rank jutsu. This was the meeting of two fundamental forces: darkness and light, hatred and love, the will to destroy and the will to protect. The resulting explosion should have leveled the entire valley. Instead, something impossible happened. The energy didn't dissipate. Instead, it began to spiral upward in a column of twisted spacetime that punched through the cloud layer and kept going. Higher and higher, until it reached the edge of the atmosphere itself. And there, in the cold void between worlds, it bloomed like a flower made of pure chakra. The signal was visible from the moon's surface, a pillar of light that burned across the electromagnetic spectrum in frequencies that hadn't been seen for over 1,000 years. Ancient systems that had been dormant since the age of Kaguya suddenly flickered to life, and in the deepest chambers of forgotten ruins, things that had been sleeping began to stir. Back in the valley, both boys collapsed to their knees in the shallow water, their chakra completely exhausted. The gravitational distortions faded, and the world returned to something approaching normal physics. Sasuke was the first to recover, pushing himself upright with trembling arms. The curse mark had receded, leaving him looking pale and drained, but his eyes were still the crimson of the Sharingan. "What did you do?" he whispered, staring up at the column of light that was only now beginning to fade. "What was that power?" Naruto didn't answer immediately. He was staring at his own hands like he'd never seen them before, trying to process what had just happened. The voice in his head had gone quiet, but he could still feel its presence, patient and watchful and infinitely sad. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I think it's been waiting for me my whole life." Sasuke studied him with those enhanced eyes, seeing the way Naruto's chakra signature had fundamentally changed. The two souls were still there, still overlapping, but now they were connected by threads of energy that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. "You're not human anymore," Sasuke said quietly. "Are you?" Naruto looked up at him, and for just a moment, Sasuke saw something ancient and terrible and infinitely compassionate looking back at him. "I don't know what I am," Naruto admitted, "but I'm still me. I'm still your friend if you'll let me be." Sasuke was quiet for a long time, watching the last traces of that impossible light fade from the sky. Finally, he spoke. "The things I saw when our chakra collided. There's something coming, isn't there? Something that's been waiting for a signal just like the one we sent." Naruto felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Yeah, I think there is. Then I guess we're both going to need to get a lot stronger," Sasuke said, and for the first time since he'd arrived in the valley, he sounded like himself again. "Because whatever's out there, whatever's been sleeping in the dark between worlds, it knows about you now, and it's going to come looking." High above them, the moon hung like a pale eye in the darkening sky. And for those who knew how to look, knew what signs to watch for, its surface was no longer quite as empty as it appeared. Things were moving in the ancient cities carved from lunar stone. Constructs that had been dormant for a millennium were powering up, their sensors turning toward the small blue world that hung like a jewel in their sky. The first seal had been broken. The long sleep was ending. And somewhere in the deepest vaults of the moon's hidden cities, something that had been waiting patiently for over 1,000 years finally opened eyes like pale fire and smiled. Darkness. That was the first thing Naruto noticed when consciousness began to creep back into his mind. Not the warm, comfortable darkness of sleep, but something deeper, older, like being at the bottom of an ocean that had never known sunlight. He tried to move and found that he could, though his body felt strange lighter somehow, as if gravity had decided to take a break. When he looked down at himself, he was surprised to see that his clothes were different. Gone were his orange and black training outfit, replaced by simple white robes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. "Where am I?" he whispered, and his voice echoed strangely in the vast emptiness around him. "You are in the space between spaces," a familiar voice answered from the darkness. "The place where souls go to have conversations that the waking mind cannot comprehend." A figure materialized out of the void, walking toward him with measured steps. It was the man from his visions, tall and elegant, with long white hair that moved in a breeze that Naruto couldn't feel. But now, seeing him clearly for the first time, Naruto could make out details that had been hidden before. The pale eyes that held depths like looking into eternity. The markings on his forehead that seemed to shift and flow like living moonlight. The expression of infinite sadness mixed with something that might have been hope. "Hamura," Naruto said, and somehow he knew the name was right even though no one had ever taught it to him. "Indeed," the ancient figure inclined his head slightly. "Though I suspect you already knew that, didn't you?" Deep down, in the parts of your mind that remember things your conscious self never experienced. Before Naruto could respond, another presence made itself known. This one didn't emerge from the darkness so much as the darkness itself seemed to step aside in deference. The newcomer was older, his hair darker, his eyes carrying the weight of wisdom and terrible choices. Where Hamura felt like moonlight and stillness, this figure radiated the warmth and energy of the sun itself. "Brother," Hagoromo said, his voice carrying both affection and concern as he looked at Hamura. Then his gaze shifted to Naruto, and those ancient eyes widened slightly in what might have been surprise. "And you're not what I expected at all." Naruto looked back and forth between the two legendary figures, his mind struggling to process what was happening. "Okay, so you're both dead guys who somehow live in my head now. Because I've got to tell you, my life was complicated enough before adding ancient spirits to the mix." Despite the gravity of the situation, both brothers smiled at that. It was Hagoromo who spoke first. "We're not quite dead and we don't exactly live in your head," he explained patiently. "Think of us more as echoes, imprints left behind when we chose to scatter our essence across time and space rather than simply dying. I scattered mine to hide the world from those who would destroy it," Hamura added quietly. "My brother chose a different path, dividing his power among worthy successors, hoping that one day someone would arise who could surpass even us. And now here you are," Hagoromo continued, his expression growing more serious. "Carrying not just my legacy, but my brother's as well, something that should be impossible." Naruto felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of this strange place. "What do you mean, impossible?" The two brothers exchanged a look that spoke of conversations held across centuries, of disagreements that had never quite been resolved. "Show him," Hamura said softly. Hagoromo nodded, raising one hand. The darkness around them suddenly blazed with light, revealing a vast chamber that seemed to be carved from crystal and starlight. The walls were covered in moving images, not quite murals, but something closer to living history. Naruto could see events playing out like movies. The sealing of Kaguya, the creation of the tailed beasts, the long centuries of human civilization that had followed. But it was the image directly in front of him that made his breath catch. It showed two streams of energy, one golden like sunlight and the other silver like moonbeams, flowing through time in separate paths. Occasionally one would touch the earth, creating a bright spot that Naruto somehow knew represented a reincarnation. The golden stream had many such touches, Ashura, the first Hokage, and others. The silver stream had far fewer, and they were scattered across different families and clans. "Reincarnation isn't random," Hagoromo explained, watching Naruto study the display. "It follows patterns, cycles, laws that are as fundamental as gravity or time. My chakra reincarnates in those who share Ashura's will, the desire to protect others through bonds and cooperation. My brother's chakra chooses differently. I reincarnate in those who understand sacrifice," Hamura said, his voice heavy with old pain. "Those willing to bear impossible burdens for the sake of others, even if it means being forgotten or misunderstood." Naruto frowned, still trying to understand. "But that doesn't explain why I have both. I mean, those sound like pretty similar things to me." "Similar, but not identical," Hagoromo said, "and the differences have always been enough to keep our essences separate. Until now, the image shifted, showing a new pattern. This time, the golden and silver streams began to curve toward each other, drawn by some invisible force. Where they met, there was an explosion of light so brilliant that Naruto had to shield his eyes. "You were born during a convergence that happens perhaps once every 10,000 years, Hamura explained. "A celestial alignment that created a resonance between our scattered souls. For the first time in history, both legacies chose the same vessel." "Lucky me," Naruto muttered, then immediately felt bad about the sarcasm. These were basically his ancestors, and they were trying to help him understand something important. "Sorry, it's just, this is a lot to take in." "Don't apologize for being overwhelmed," Hagoromo said kindly. "What you're experiencing would challenge anyone. The human mind wasn't designed to hold two sets of ancient memories, two different power systems, two distinct personalities that have been separate for over a millennium." That made Naruto's stomach lurch. "Two personalities. You mean I'm gonna lose myself, turn into someone else?" "Not lose yourself," Hamura said quickly, "but you will change. The question is how much and whether you'll be able to guide that change or simply be swept along by it." The chamber around them shifted again, and suddenly Naruto was looking at himself, or rather multiple versions of himself. In one image, he saw himself with eyes like pale fire, standing on the moon's surface as he commanded forces that could reshape worlds. In another, his eyes blazed with golden light as he led armies against threats that came from beyond the stars. And in a third, darker image, he saw himself torn apart by conflicting impulses, his mind shattered by the pressure of containing two souls that were never meant to coexist. "The choice is yours," Hagoromo said solemnly. "You can try to suppress one aspect of your nature in favor of the other. Many dual reincarnations have tried that path. It usually ends in madness or death. You can allow both aspects to exist separately within you," Hamura continued. "Living as two people in one body, this path preserves sanity but often leads to a fractured sense of self." Or, both brothers spoke in unison now, their voices harmonizing in a way that made the crystal walls ring like bells. "You can forge something new, take the best of both legacies and create a synthesis that transcends either one alone." Naruto stared at the images showing his possible futures. "And if I choose the third option? What happens then? We don't know," Hamura admitted. "No one has ever successfully integrated both our legacies before. You would be walking an entirely untrodden path." But, Hagoromo added with a slight smile, "if anyone could manage it, I suspect it would be someone who spent his entire life proving that the impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet." Despite everything, Naruto found himself grinning. "You know what? You're right. I mean, I've already got a demon fox living in my head. I'm apparently the reincarnation of two legendary guys, and half the village still thinks I'm some kind of monster. Adding impossible magical hybrid to the list can't make things much weirder." The brothers exchanged another look, this one containing something that might have been relief. "There is one more thing you need to know," Hamura said, his expression growing grave. "The signal you sent when your power awakened, it didn't just reach Earth's atmosphere. The chamber around them darkened and new images appeared. These showed the void between worlds, the cold spaces where light had never touched. And moving through that darkness were shapes that hurt to look at directly, things that were too big, too complex, too alien for human perception to properly process. My barrier has been weakening for centuries," Hamura continued. "And your awakening just tore a hole in what remained of it. The Otsutsuki clan's main family will detect the breach within months, perhaps weeks." "Main family?" Naruto asked, though part of him already knew the answer would be bad. "Kaguya was a low-ranking scout," Hagoromo explained grimly. "The entities coming now are her superiors, beings of such power that she fled across the galaxy to escape them. They harvest worlds the way farmers harvest crops, draining them of all life and chakra before moving on to the next target. The images showed worlds dying, entire planets reduced to lifeless husks as massive tree-like structures drained away their energy. And overseeing it all were figures that radiated malice so pure it was almost a physical force." "How long do we have?" Naruto asked quietly. "Perhaps a year if we're fortunate," Hamura said. "Less if they decide to prioritize Earth over their other conquests." Naruto was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd learned. Then, to both brothers' surprise, he started to laugh. "You know what the really funny thing is?" he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "A few hours ago, my biggest worry was passing the Chunin exams. Now I find out I'm supposed to save the world from cosmic horrors that even legendary ninja ran away from." "You don't have to face them alone," Hagoromo reminded him. "You have friends, allies, an entire village that will stand with you once they understand the threat. And you have us," Hamura added. "Our knowledge, our memories, our power, all of it is yours to use. We cannot fight directly anymore, but we can guide you, teach you, help you access abilities that would normally take lifetimes to master." Naruto nodded, feeling something settling into place deep in his chest. Not quite confidence, the situation was too dire for that, but a sense of purpose that felt as solid as bedrock. "Okay," he said simply. "Where do we start?" Both brothers smiled at that, and for the first time since this conversation began, they looked truly hopeful. "We start with teaching you to balance our essences without losing yourself," Hagoromo said. "The techniques for channeling both solar and lunar chakra simultaneously. How to access the Tenseigan without burning out your optic nerves. And we teach you the hidden history," Hamura continued. "The real story of what happened during our mother's defeat, the location of ancient weapons and sanctuaries that even Kaguya didn't know about. The secret techniques that were developed specifically to fight beings like those who are coming. Plus," Hagoromo added with a slight grin that reminded Naruto strongly of himself. We'll need to figure out how to explain this to the Hokage without giving the old man a heart attack. Despite everything, Naruto laughed again. Yeah, that's gonna be a fun conversation. Hey, Gramps, turns out I'm the reincarnation of both sons of the goddess who nearly destroyed the world, and also there are space aliens coming to eat our planet. Also, I can make things float now. The crystal chamber around them began to fade, and Naruto could feel consciousness tugging at the edges of his mind. The real world was calling him back. Remember, Hamura said as his figure started to become translucent, the power you're inheriting comes with a price. The memories of everyone we've been, everyone we've lost, everyone we failed to save, all of that becomes part of you. But also remember, Hagoromo added, his own form beginning to blur, that you are not us. You are not bound by our limitations, our failures, our regrets. You have the chance to be something we never could, something better. The last thing Naruto saw before the mindscape dissolved entirely was both brothers standing side by side, their ancient rivalry set aside in favor of a shared hope that their successor might succeed where they had not. Then he was awake, lying on his back in the shallow water of the Valley of the End with Sasuke crouched beside him, sharing in still active an expression unreadable. How long was I out? Naruto asked, sitting up slowly. About 10 minutes, Sasuke replied. You've been muttering in your sleep, something about moons and barriers and… He paused, studying Naruto's face intently. Your eyes are different. Naruto blinked, then looked down at his reflection in the water. What he saw made him catch his breath. His eyes were still blue, but now they seemed to contain depths that hadn't been there before, like looking at the sky and seeing not just color but infinite space beyond. I guess they would be, he said quietly. Then louder, Sasuke, I need to tell you something big. His former teammate raised an eyebrow. Bigger than whatever just sent a pillar of light into space and probably alerted every sensor ninja within 100 miles. Yeah, Naruto said, getting to his feet. Way bigger than that. As he began to explain what he'd learned in the mindscape about dual reincarnation, about cosmic threats, about powers that could reshape reality itself, Sasuke listened with the kind of intense focus that had always made him such a formidable opponent. And when Naruto finished his explanation, Sasuke was quiet for a long moment before asking the question that would change everything. So when these Otsutsuki show up, what's the plan? Naruto grinned, feeling the new power humming in his veins like a second heartbeat. We get stronger, we get ready, and we show them that Earth isn't some helpless little planet they can just roll over. We, Naruto confirmed, because no matter what else happens, no matter how much I change or what powers I get, I'm still gonna need my best friend watching my back. For the first time since their fight began, Sasuke smiled. Then I guess we'd better get started. Above them, the moon hung like a pale eye in the darkening sky, and for those who knew how to look, its surface was no longer quite as empty as it appeared. The long sleep was ending. The convergence had begun, and somewhere in the spaces between worlds, ancient hunters caught the scent of their prey and began to turn their attention toward a small blue world that had just announced its location to anyone listening. The game was about to change. The Moon Temple wasn't supposed to exist. Naruto stared up at the ancient structure carved into the cliff face, its white stone seeming to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the pale moonbeams filtering through the forest canopy above. According to every map he'd ever seen, this part of the Land of Fire was supposed to be empty wilderness. No settlements, no ruins, no mysterious temples that made his newly awakened senses sing with recognition. You feel it too, don't you? Jiraiya asked quietly, standing beside him with his arms crossed. The legendary Sannin looked older than Naruto remembered, like the weight of secrets was finally starting to show on his face. That sense of coming home to a place you've never been. Naruto nodded, unable to trust his voice. The pull had been growing stronger over the 3 weeks since they'd left Konoha, leading them on a winding path through forests and mountains that seemed to bend around hidden places. And now, standing before this impossible temple, he could feel something vast and patient stirring in the depths of his mind. Welcome home, Hamura's voice whispered in his thoughts. Though it has been so very long since last I walked these halls. How long has this place been here? Naruto asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Longer than Konoha, longer than the hidden villages. Maybe longer than recorded history itself. Jiraiya stepped forward, placing his hand on the carved symbols that decorated the temple's entrance. The moment his skin made contact with the stone, the markings blazed with soft silver light. I've been searching for places like this my whole life. sacred sites where the barriers between worlds grow thin, where the old powers still linger. The entrance to the temple stood open, revealing corridors that seemed to stretch back into the mountain itself. As they walked deeper into the structure, Naruto noticed that the walls were covered in murals similar to the ones he'd seen in the Hyuga archives, but older, more detailed, showing events and figures that felt familiar in ways that made his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. "Jiraiya-sensei," Naruto said as they reached a circular chamber deep within the temple, "when you said you'd help me learn to control this power, did you know it would lead us here?" The older man was quiet for a long moment, studying the massive carved tree that dominated the center of the room. Its branches stretched up toward a domed ceiling painted to look like the night sky, complete with stars that seemed to twinkle with their own light. "I had hopes," Jiraiya admitted finally. "The prophecy I've been following my whole life. It spoke of a child who would bring change to the world. I thought it was Minato at first, then later I wondered if it might be you. But the signs were always incomplete, the visions unclear." He turned to face Naruto, and in his eyes was a mixture of wonder and worry that made Naruto's stomach clench. "What I saw you do in that valley 3 weeks ago, that wasn't just the Nine Tails' power, that was something else entirely, something that made the great Toad Sage sit up and take notice for the first time in decades." Naruto felt heat rise in his cheeks. "About that, there's some stuff I probably should have told you earlier. Such as the fact that you're apparently the dual reincarnation of both sons of the Sage of Six Paths," Jiraiya asked dryly. "Or that you've been having conversations with ancient spirits who have been dead for over 1,000 years. Naruto's mouth fell open. "How did you, kid? I've been studying seals, prophecies, and forbidden jutsu longer than you've been alive. When someone manifests gravitational distortions and starts glowing with chakra that feels older than civilization, it tends to narrow down the possibilities." Jiraiya's expression grew more serious. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Before Naruto could answer, the chamber around them began to change. The painted stars on the ceiling started to move, swirling in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The carved tree in the center of the room creaked as if stirred by invisible wind, and from its branches, soft chimes began to ring. "The temple is responding to your presence," Jiraiya observed, though he looked more fascinated than alarmed. "I've never seen anything like this." Naruto closed his eyes and let his enhanced senses reach out, feeling for the currents of energy that seemed to flow through every stone of this place. What he found made his breath catch. The entire temple was a massive seal array, more complex than anything he'd ever imagined. But it wasn't designed to contain or suppress. Instead, it was meant to focus and amplify. Like a giant lens for chakra, designed to help someone access powers that would normally be impossible to control. "My greatest work," Hamura's voice said softly in his mind. "I built this place in the years after our mother's defeat, when I first began to understand the true scope of the threats that would come for our world. It was meant to train those who would carry my legacy. But no one's ever used it," Naruto said aloud, somehow certain of the fact. "Because no one worthy of the training ever came," came the reply, this time from Hagoromo. "The dual reincarnation was always theoretical, a possibility we discussed but never truly expected to occur." Jiraiya was watching him with the kind of intense focus that made Naruto shift uncomfortably. "Are they talking to you right now, the brothers?" "Yeah, they say this place was built to train someone like me." Naruto looked around the chamber again, seeing it with new eyes. "Someone who carries both their legacies." "Then I guess we'd better get started," Jiraiya said, settling into a cross-legged position on the floor. "Because based on what I've been able to piece together from ancient texts and Toad prophecies, we don't have a lot of time." The training that followed was unlike anything Naruto had ever experienced. Where his previous instruction had focused on specific techniques or gradual improvements, this was about fundamental transformation. Jiraiya guided him through meditation exercises that helped him distinguish between the different types of chakra flowing through his system: the chaotic red energy of the Nine Tails, the warm golden power of Ashura's legacy, and the cool silver radiance that belonged to Hamura. "The trick isn't to suppress any of them," Jiraiya explained as they worked through the first week. "It's to find the harmony between them, like conducting an orchestra where each instrument is trying to play a different song." It was harder than it sounded. The three energy types had completely different rhythms, different resonance frequencies, different ways of interacting with the world around them. When Naruto tried to force them to work together, the result was usually either a complete failure or a minor explosion that left scorch marks on the temple walls. But slowly, gradually, he began to find the pattern. The breakthrough came during their second week, on a night when the moon was full and hanging directly overhead. Naruto had been struggling with a particularly difficult exercise, trying to create a Rasengan using pure Hamura chakra instead of his usual mix, when something clicked. Instead of forcing the silver energy to behave like his normal chakra, he let it flow according to its own nature. Where his usual Rasengan was a sphere of controlled destruction, this version was something else entirely. It looked the same at first glance, but as it spun in his palm, it seemed to bend space around itself. Light curved strangely near its surface, and Naruto could feel gravitational distortions rippling outward in waves. Incredible, Jiraiya breathed, watching the technique with wide eyes. It's not just manipulating chakra, it's manipulating the fundamental forces that hold reality together. Naruto let the technique dissipate, feeling drained but exhilarated. Is that what Hamura could do, change gravity and stuff? Among other things, came the ancient spirit's voice in his mind. But that technique you just performed, I never developed anything quite like that. You're already beginning to surpass the original. Over the following days, Naruto discovered that his new abilities went far beyond just gravity manipulation. When he channeled Hamura's chakra through his eyes, his vision changed in ways that made the Byakugan look primitive by comparison. He could see through dimensions, perceive the flow of time itself, and detect energy signatures from across vast distances. The first time he successfully activated what Hamura called the true Tensei Gon, the experience was overwhelming. Suddenly he could see everything, every bird in the forest, every fish in the streams, every person in the villages dozens of miles away. More disturbing, he could see things that weren't quite in their world, shadows moving through spaces that existed parallel to normal reality. There are things living in the spaces between dimensions, he told Jiraiya that night, his new eyes still aching from the intensity of the vision. Things that are watching our world, waiting for something. Jiraiya's expression grew grim. The Otsutsuki, some of them, but there's other stuff too. Older things, things that were here before Kaguya ever arrived. Naruto shuddered, remembering glimpses of entities so alien that his mind had trouble processing them. Hamura says that's part of why he scattered his soul, to hide Earth from their attention. And now that you're awakening, that hiding becomes harder to maintain, Jiraiya said quietly. Yeah, the barriers are already starting to crack. Their training intensified after that revelation. Jiraiya pushed Naruto through exercises designed to help him access both aspects of his heritage simultaneously, creating techniques that combine the raw power of Ashura's legacy with the precision and cosmic awareness of Hamura's gifts. The results were sometimes spectacular and often terrifying. When Naruto learned to create truth-seeking orbs infused with both solar and lunar chakra, the resulting spheres could cut through any material they tested while simultaneously bending space around themselves. When he managed to enter a state Hagoromo called Dual Sage Mode, his awareness expanded to encompass not just the natural energy of their world, but the cosmic forces that flowed between stars. But with each new breakthrough came new challenges. The more power Naruto accessed, the more the different aspects of his personality began to assert themselves. There were days when he woke up feeling like Ashura, warm, optimistic, focused on protecting others through strength and bonds. Other days he felt more like Hamura, distant, contemplative, burdened by the weight of cosmic responsibility. You're fragmenting, Jiraiya observed during their third week, watching as Naruto struggled through a meditation exercise. I can see it in your chakra signature. The different aspects of your soul are starting to separate instead of integrate. Naruto opened his eyes, and Jiraiya had to suppress a shiver at what he saw there. For just a moment, they had been completely inhuman, ancient, and sad, and carrying depths that belonged to someone who had watched civilizations rise and fall. I can feel it happening, Naruto admitted quietly. Sometimes I forget which memories are mine and which belong to them. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about people I've never met like I knew them personally. That's the danger of dual reincarnation, Hagoromo's voice said in his mind. The human psyche wasn't designed to hold two complete sets of ancient memories. Most who have attempted it lost themselves entirely within the first few months. But you also have advantages they didn't, Hamura added. You have bonds, connections to other people that anchor your sense of self. Use them. Remember who you chose to be, not just who we once were. Naruto closed his eyes and focused on those connections. Sakura's determined smile. Kakashi's lazy drawl hiding genuine concern. Iruka's proud grin when he'd finally graduated. And Sasuke Sasuke's complicated mixture of rivalry and friendship that had defined so much of who Naruto had become. When he opened his eyes again, they were their normal blue and Jiraiya relaxed slightly. "Better," the Sannin said approvingly. "The key is balance, not suppression. You need to be able to access their knowledge and power without losing yourself in their personalities." The breakthrough came unexpectedly during their final week at the temple. Naruto had been working on a particularly difficult technique, trying to create a stable portal between dimensions using pure chakra manipulation, when something went wrong. The portal destabilized, creating a rift in spacetime that began pulling everything in the chamber toward it. Jiraiya shouted something, but his words were lost in the roaring sound of reality tearing itself apart. The carved tree in the center of the room began to crack, and chunks of stone fell from the ceiling as the temple's structural integrity failed. In that moment of crisis, something inside Naruto shifted. Instead of panic, he felt a calm that seemed to come from three sources at once: his own determination not to let his sensei die, Ashura's protective instincts, and Hamura's cosmic awareness. The three aspects of his soul didn't merge so much as they found harmony, like instruments in an orchestra finally playing the same song. The portal stabilized instantly. More than that, Naruto found he could control it with precision that shouldn't have been possible. He gently closed the rift, sealing the dimensional breach so smoothly that there was barely a whisper of displaced air. "How did you do that?" Jiraiya asked, his voice hoarse with strain. Naruto looked down at his hands, seeing chakra flowing through them in patterns that were completely new yet felt perfectly natural. The three energy types weren't fighting anymore, they were working together, each one enhancing the others in ways that created something greater than the sum of their parts. "I stopped trying to choose between them," he said quietly. "I stopped thinking of myself as carrying three different souls and started thinking of myself as one soul that had been shaped by three different experiences." In his mind, both Hagoromo and Hamura smiled. "Now you begin to understand," they said in unison. "You are not us. You are not our replacement. You are something new, something that carries the best of both our legacies while being bound by neither of our limitations." As they prepared to leave the temple and return to Konoha, Jiraiya pulled Naruto aside for one final conversation. "The power you've awakened over these past few weeks," he said seriously, "it's beyond anything I've ever seen. Beyond anything I think the world has ever seen. That makes you incredibly valuable and incredibly dangerous." Naruto nodded, understanding the implications. "People are going to want to control me. Or eliminate me. Both. And the threats won't just come from other villages. There are individuals and organizations that will see what you're becoming and decide that you're too dangerous to exist. Some of them might even be right." The thought should have been terrifying, but Naruto found himself surprisingly calm about it. Maybe that was another gift from his ancient passengers, the ability to accept necessary burdens without letting them crush his spirit. "Then I guess I'll just have to prove them wrong," he said simply. Jiraiya smiled at that, but it was tinged with sadness. "Just promise me something, kid. No matter how powerful you become, no matter how heavy the responsibilities get, don't forget who you chose to be. Don't let the weight of cosmic destiny make you lose sight of the fact that you're also just Naruto Uzumaki, knucklehead ninja of the Hidden Leaf Village." "I promise," Naruto said, and meant it. As they walked away from the temple, Naruto looked back once to see the ancient structure beginning to fade, becoming translucent like a mirage. By the time they reached the tree line, it was gone entirely, leaving only unmarked cliff face behind. But in his mind, he could still hear the soft chimes of the carved tree's branches, and he knew that the temple hadn't disappeared. It had simply returned to the space between spaces, waiting for the next time it would be needed. Above them, the moon hung pale and watchful in the dawn sky. And somewhere in the depths of space, ancient hunters caught the scent of awakened power and began to adjust their course toward a small blue world that was no longer quite as hidden as it had once been. The long sleep was ending. The game was about to begin. And Naruto Uzumaki, dual inheritor of solar and lunar legacies, bridge between Earth and cosmos, synthesis of ancient powers, was almost ready to meet whatever came next. Almost, the sky above Konoha was bleeding. Massive clouds of dust and debris hung in the air like a brown shroud, punctuated by the orange glow of fires that seemed to burn in every direction. From his position on the cliff overlooking the village, Naruto felt his heart clench as he took in the devastation below. Half the village was simply gone. Where the Hokage Tower had stood for decades, there was now a crater so deep he couldn't see the bottom. The academy where he'd struggled through his early years was nothing but rubble, and everywhere there were bodies. "This is my fault," he whispered, his hands clenching into fists. "If I'd been here, you'd be dead too," Jiraiya said grimly, studying the destruction through a pair of field glasses. "Whatever did this, it's not like any jutsu I've ever seen. This level of devastation requires power that shouldn't exist." But Naruto was barely listening. His enhanced senses were reaching out across the ruined village, searching for familiar chakra signatures. Iruka's warm presence was faint but alive, somewhere in the emergency shelters. Sakura's fierce energy was moving through what remained of the hospital district, probably treating wounded, and Kakashi was fighting something in the village center, something that made the silver-haired Jonin's normally controlled chakra spike with desperation. "I have to get down there," Naruto said, already channeling chakra to his legs for the jump. "Wait," Jiraiya grabbed his arm. "Look closer, use those new eyes of yours." Naruto activated his Tenseigan, feeling the familiar sensation of his vision expanding beyond normal limits. Suddenly he could see not just the physical destruction below, but the patterns of chakra that had created it. And what he saw made his blood run cold. There were 6 distinct energy signatures moving through the village like a coordinated hunting pack. Each one felt wrong, somehow human, but filtered through something else. Something that distorted their natural chakra flow into patterns that hurt to perceive directly. But it was the 7th signature that made him stagger. This one wasn't moving through the village, it was the village. Or rather, it was connected to every grain of sand, every piece of rubble, every drop of moisture in the air. The entire battlefield had become an extension of this entity's senses. "Rinnegan," Hamura's voice whispered in his mind, heavy with ancient recognition. "I would know those eyes anywhere. But this wielder, something is very wrong with how he's using that power." "The sage's eyes," Hagoromo added, his mental voice tight with concern, "but divided among multiple bodies. This is not natural reincarnation. Someone has artificially split a single soul across 6 vessels." Naruto felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. 6 bodies sharing one soul, is that even possible? For someone with sufficient knowledge of the Rinnegan's true capabilities, yes, Jiraiya said quietly. He'd been listening to Naruto's half of the conversation, and his expression was grim. "The 6 paths of pain technique. I'd heard rumors, but I never thought." A massive explosion erupted from the village center, and through his enhanced vision, Naruto saw Kakashi's form flying through the air like a broken doll. The Jonin hit the side of a building with enough force to crack stone, then slumped to the ground and didn't get up. "That's it," Naruto snarled, golden chakra beginning to flicker around him like flames. "I'm done watching." But as he prepared to leap into battle, something made him pause. One of the 6 figures below had stopped moving and was looking directly at him. Even from this distance, even through the chaos and destruction, Naruto could feel those rippled purple eyes boring into him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Then the figure spoke, and somehow his words carried clearly across the intervening space, cutting through the sounds of battle like a blade through silk. "Naruto Uzumaki, child of 2 moons. Inheritor of divided legacies." The voice was cold, mechanical, completely devoid of human warmth. "You will come with us." Jiraiya cursed under his breath. "How does he know about your dual nature?" That information was classified at the highest levels. But Naruto was already moving, his body blazing with chakra that shifted between gold and silver like molten starlight. He hit the village streets running, leaving craters in the pavement with each step as he pushed his enhanced physical abilities to their limits. The first of Pain's bodies to intercept him was the one Naruto would later learn was called the Deva Path. It moved with inhuman speed, its hands weaving signs that seemed to bend reality around them. Shinra Tensei, the repulsive force that erupted from the figure, should have sent Naruto flying backward like Kakashi. Instead, something impossible happened. Naruto's Tenseigan flared to life, turning his eyes into pools of pale fire, and the gravitational wave simply stopped. Not reflected, not absorbed, but negated entirely as Naruto's own mastery over fundamental forces clashed with Pain's technique. "Impossible," the Deva Path said, and for the first time, there was something like surprise in that mechanical voice. "You're not the only one who can play with gravity," Naruto replied, raising his hand. The air around it began to shimmer as space-time bent inward on itself. "But I bet you've never seen it done like this." The miniature black hole that formed in his palm was barely the size of a marble, but its effects were immediate and dramatic. Debris from the surrounding area began spiraling inward, and the Deva path found itself fighting against forces that exceeded even its enhanced abilities. But Pain had 5 other bodies, and they moved to attack in perfect coordination. The Asura path came at him from the left, its body transforming into a mechanical nightmare of blades and projectile weapons. The animal path summoned a massive centipede that erupted from the ground beneath his feet. And the human path circled around behind him, its hands reaching for his head with the intention of ripping his soul directly from his body. In the old days, Naruto would have been overwhelmed in seconds. Instead, he smiled. Time seemed to slow as he entered the state Hagoromo had taught him to call Dual Sage Mode. His awareness expanded beyond the merely human, encompassing not just the natural energy of the world around him, but the cosmic forces that flowed between dimensions. The 3 sources of power within him, Ninetail's chakra, Ashura's solar legacy, and Hamura's lunar inheritance, found perfect harmony for the first time since his awakening. When he moved, it was like watching a force of nature given human form. The Asura path's mechanical weapons met truth-seeking orbs that simply unmade them at the molecular level. The summoned centipede found itself caught in gravitational distortions that compressed its massive form into a sphere barely larger than a person. And the human path, reaching for Naruto's soul, instead found its own consciousness pulled into a mental battlefield where it faced not 1 enemy but 3. You seek to steal memories and spirit, Hagoromo's voice echoed in the shared mindscape. Then face the memories of the sage himself. You would drain the life from others, Hamura added, his presence like cold starlight. Then feel the weight of cosmic awareness, the burden of watching over all life. The human path's consciousness recoiled, overwhelmed by the sheer vastness of the experiences it had tried to consume. When the mental contact broke, the body staggered backward, its Rinnegan flickering like a broken light. But even as 3 of Pain's paths retreated, the remaining 3 pressed their attack. The Preta path lunged forward with hands designed to absorb any chakra-based technique, while the Naraka path summoned the King of Hell to judge Naruto's worthiness. And high above, the Deva path prepared to unleash its most devastating technique. Chibaku Tensei, a sphere of dark chakra shot skyward, and immediately the battlefield began to change. Massive chunks of stone and earth tore themselves free from the ground, spiraling upward toward the focal point as an artificial moon began to form directly above the village. Naruto felt the pull trying to drag him skyward along with everything else, but instead of fighting it, he did something that made even Pain's mechanical composure crack. He took control of it. His Tenseigan blazed brighter, and suddenly the gravitational forces weren't pulling him toward the growing satellite. They were flowing through him, responding to his will rather than Pain's. The artificial moon stopped growing and began to pulse with silver light as Naruto's lunar chakra infected the technique at its source. "You know what your problem is," Naruto said, rising into the air as he rode the gravitational currents like invisible steps. "You're using a technique based on moon-related forces against someone who is the moon." What followed wasn't really a battle so much as a demonstration. The artificial satellite that Pain had created began to reshape itself under Naruto's influence, transforming from a crude sphere into something far more elegant and complex. Structures appeared on its surface, spires and domes, and connecting bridges that looked like they belonged to some impossible city. And from these structures, beams of concentrated moonlight began to lance downward with surgical precision. Each beam found its target with unerring accuracy. The Preta path, reaching out to absorb what it thought was normal chakra, instead found itself trying to drain the fundamental forces that held matter together. Its body began to discorporate at the molecular level, unraveling like a poorly woven tapestry. The Naraka path's King of Hell, summoned to judge truth from lies, found itself faced with something that transcended such simple categories. When confronted with a being who carried the memories and experiences of multiple lifetimes, the spiritual construct simply froze, unable to process input that exceeded its design parameters. And the animal path, attempting to summon reinforcements, discovered that its connection to the summoning realm had been severed. The space-time distortions radiating from Naruto's position were interfering with dimensional travel on a fundamental level. Within minutes, 5 of Pain's 6 bodies lay broken and motionless in the ruins of Konoha's streets. Only the Deva path remained, and even its mechanical composure was starting to crack. The Rinnegan in its eyes spun faster as it tried to process what it was seeing, tried to understand how a simple village boy had just casually dismantled techniques that should have been beyond any mortal power. "What are you?" the Deva Path asked, its voice carrying something that might have been fear. Naruto descended from the artificial moon, which continued to hang in the sky like a second celestial body. When his feet touched the ground, the impact sent ripples through the earth that rearranged the surrounding debris into complex geometric patterns. "I'm what happens when you mess with my village," he said simply. Then his expression grew more serious. "But more than that, I'm someone who can see through those eyes of yours. I can see the real you, the broken man controlling these bodies from wherever you're hiding." The Deva Path took a step backward, and for the first time since the battle began, it looked genuinely surprised. "You can see Nagato?" it asked. "I can see everything," Naruto replied, his Tenseigan allowing him to perceive not just the physical bodies before him, but the chakra threads connecting them to their distant controller. "I can see the pain you've been carrying, the loss that drove you to this. And I can see the man who's been manipulating that pain for his own purposes." In a hidden chamber beneath the village of Aimgakure, Nagato's emaciated form jerked as if struck. The young man's eyes, his real eyes, not the mechanical constructs he controlled, widened in shock. "Impossible," he whispered. "No one should be able to see through the connection at this distance." But Naruto's voice somehow reached him anyway, carried along the same chakra threads that connected the Deva Path to its master. "I know about the cycle," Naruto said, his words echoing in the hidden chamber. "I know about Indra and Ashura, about the endless reincarnations of hatred and love. But I also know about something else, something the man pulling your strings doesn't want you to understand." The Deva Path's hands clenched into fists. "Madara's plan will bring peace to this world. Through pain, people will understand. Madara's plan will get everyone killed," Naruto interrupted. "Because there are things out there in the dark between worlds that make even the sage of 6 paths look like an academy student. And when they come, when the real Otsutsuki arrive, we're going to need every bit of strength we can get to fight them." In the hidden chamber, Nagato felt something cold settle in his stomach. The way Naruto spoke about these Otsutsuki, there was a certainty there, a knowledge that went beyond mere speculation. "You're lying," he said through the Deva Path's mouth, but even as he spoke the words, doubt was creeping into his voice. "Ask Madara about Kaguya," Naruto said quietly. "Ask him why she was so afraid of her own clan that she betrayed them and hid on Earth. Ask him what he thinks is going to happen when they finally track her down." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of debris settling in the ruined village. Finally, the Deva Path spoke again, its voice quieter than before. "Even if what you say is true, it changes nothing. This world is broken, it needs to be remade." "Maybe," Naruto admitted, "but not like this. Not through fear and pain and control. If we're going to face what's coming, we need to do it together, all of us, even you." He took a step forward, his chakra shifting to a warmer, more welcoming frequency. "I can show you another way, Nagato, a path that doesn't require you to carry all the world's pain alone." For a moment, something flickered in the Deva Path's eyes, something human. Then a new voice cut through the air like a blade, cold and mocking and filled with ancient malice. "How touching! The child of 2 moons thinks he can save everyone." The figure that emerged from the shadows at the edge of the battlefield wore a spiral mask and moved with predatory grace. But it was the chakra signature that made both Naruto and Nagato's hearts skip a beat, dark and twisted, and carrying echoes of powers that should have been lost to history. "Madara," the Deva Path breathed. "Indeed," the masked figure replied. "And I must say, Nagato, you've been having quite the interesting conversation. The boy knows more than he should about things that haven't happened yet." Those dark eyes fixed on Naruto, and even through the mask, the weight of that gaze was almost physical. "Tell me, child," Madara continued, "how exactly does a simple village boy come to know about the Otsutsuki clan? That's not the sort of information that appears in academy textbooks." Naruto felt both Hagoromo and Hamura stir in the depths of his mind, their presence tense with recognition and old hatred. "This is not Madara," Hagoromo's voice whispered urgently. "The chakra signature is wrong. This is someone else wearing his name like a mask. But the knowledge he possesses is real," Hamura added grimly. "Whoever this is, they know far more about the cosmic threats than they should." "I know because I've seen what's coming," Naruto said aloud, his own voice carrying harmonics that belonged to voices far older than his own. "I've seen the harvested worlds, the dead civilizations, the endless hunger that drives them from star to star. And I know that your plan to control the Ten Tails is exactly what they want you to do." The masked figure was very still for a long moment. Then he began to laugh. "Oh, this is delicious," he said, his voice carrying genuine amusement. "You really have no idea what you've stumbled into, do you? The awakening of dual heritage, the resurrection of ancient powers. You think you're the hero of this story." He gestured toward the artificial moon that still hung above the village, its surface gleaming with structures that shouldn't exist. "You've just sent a signal that can be seen from halfway across the galaxy," he continued. "Every Otsutsuki with functioning sensors now knows exactly where to find Earth. And more importantly, they know that something impossible has happened here, something worth investigating." Naruto felt his blood turn to ice. "What are you talking about? Did you really think that little light show would go unnoticed?" The masked figure's voice was positively gleeful now. "A dual reincarnation creating stable lunar constructs in real time. There hasn't been a chakra signature like that since the original sage died. The cosmic hunters are already adjusting their course toward this system." High above them all, on the surface of the real moon, ancient sensors that had been dormant for millennia suddenly blazed to life. In the deepest chambers of Hamura's hidden city, constructs that had been sleeping since the age of Kaguya began to stir. And in the cold void between worlds, entities of such power that they made gods seem small turned their attention toward a tiny blue planet that had just announced its location to anyone listening. The game had changed. The hunters were coming. And somewhere in the ruins of Konoha, a boy who carried the legacies of two ancient brothers realized that his awakening hadn't been salvation at all. It had been a declaration of war. The Hyuga compound had never felt so divided. Hinata stood in the shadows of the main courtyard, watching as heated voices echoed from the council chamber. Through the paper walls, she could make out the silhouettes of the clan elders gesticulating wildly, their arguments growing more heated with each passing minute. An abomination that threatens the natural order. Clearly Hamura's chosen vessel. We cannot ignore the signs. Dangerous precedent if we acknowledge someone outside our bloodline. The boy saved the village. How can you speak of him as a threat? The voices cut off abruptly as footsteps approached the chamber, and Hinata pressed herself deeper into the shadows. Her father emerged first, his face a carefully controlled mask, followed by a procession of elders whose expressions ranged from thoughtful to openly hostile. Elder Hohido, his ancient face twisted with disgust, was the first to speak as they gathered in the courtyard. "This discussion is far from over, Hiyashi. That boy may carry some fragment of our ancestors' power, but he is not one of us. To even suggest that he could have claimed to leadership of this clan." "I suggested no such thing," Hiyashi replied coolly. "I merely pointed out that the ancient texts are quite clear about what should happen when Hamura's power manifests in its true form. In a true descendant," Elder Kohaku interjected, her voice shrill with indignation. "Not some vessel that happens to be convenient for ancient spirits." Hinata felt her hands clench involuntarily. They were talking about Naruto like he was a thing, not a person. Like the boy who had fought pain to save their village, who had changed her entire world just by believing in her, was nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. "The bloodline means everything," Elder Hohido continued, his voice carrying the weight of generations of tradition. "For over 1,000 years, the Hyuga have maintained our purity, our connection to our ancestor through careful breeding and rigid adherence to, and where has that gotten us?" The new voice made everyone freeze. Neji stepped out of the shadows on the opposite side of the courtyard, his pale eyes blazing with an intensity Hinata had rarely seen from her cousin. "1,000 years of tradition," he continued, his voice cutting through the evening air like a blade, "and what do we have to show for it? A clan so obsessed with bloodline purity that we bind our own children with curse marks. So focused on maintaining power that we forgot what that power was meant to protect." Elder Hohido's face flushed red. "You forget yourself, branch house. Your place is not to question." "My place," Neji laughed, and the sound was bitter as winter wind. "My place is to serve the main house until I die, right? To accept that accidents of birth matter more than strength, more than dedication, more than the ability to actually use the power we've inherited." He stepped forward, and Hinata saw something in his movement that made her breath catch. There was a fluidity there that hadn't been present before, a grace that spoke of new techniques, new understanding. "Tell me, honored elders," Neji said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "what do you see when you look at me with your precious Byakugan?" Several of the elders activated their Dijutsu automatically, and Hinata saw their expressions change from anger to confusion to something approaching fear. "Impossible," Elder Kohaku breathed. Hinata activated her own Byakugan and immediately understood their shock. Neiji's chakra system looked different. Where once there had been the artificial restrictions of the curse mark, now there were new pathways. channels of energy that seemed to flow with silver light. It was as if his proximity to Naruto during the recent battles had somehow awakened latent abilities that the clan's traditional techniques had never accessed. "The boy's awakening is affecting all of us," Neji said quietly. "Every Hyuga in the village has felt it, the resonance, the expansion of our abilities beyond what we thought possible. The question is whether we're going to embrace this evolution or cling to traditions that were already failing us." "Evolution," Elder Hohito spat. "This is contamination. The purity of our bloodline was never as pure as you pretended," Neji interrupted. "I've been studying the old records, the ones locked away in the deepest archives. Do you want to know what I found?" The elders exchanged nervous glances, but it was Hiashi who spoke. "What did you find, Neji?" "Evidence that our clan has experienced exactly this kind of awakening before. 3 times in recorded history, actually. And each time, the elders of that generation tried to suppress it, to maintain their control over abilities they didn't understand." Neiji's eyes found Hinata's across the courtyard, and she saw something in them that might have been hope. "Each time it weakened us, made us less than we could have been." Elder Kohaku stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of decades of leadership. "Even if what you say is true, it changes nothing. The boy is not Hyuga. He cannot be allowed to what?" A new voice asked from the compound's entrance. "To exist." Everyone turned as Naruto walked into the courtyard, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere. Even without activating her Byakugan, Hinata could feel the power radiating from him, not the chaotic energy of the Nine Tails, but something older and deeper and infinitely more controlled. He looked tired, she realized. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and there was a weight to his movements that hadn't been there before. The battle with pain and the revelations that had followed were taking their toll. "Naruto-kun," she said softly, stepping out of the shadows before she could stop herself. He turned toward her voice, and when their eyes met, she saw something flicker in his expression, relief, maybe, or gratitude for a friendly face in a sea of hostility. "Hey Hinata," he said, managing a tired smile. "Sorry for interrupting your family meeting. I was just looking for your father. There's something I need to discuss with him." "There is nothing to discuss," Elder Hohito said coldly. "You have no business here, boy. The Hyuga compound is not a place for outsiders." Naruto's expression didn't change, but Hinata felt the temperature in the courtyard drop several degrees. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in the very stones of the compound. "Outsider," he repeated thoughtfully. "That's interesting, because the way I understand it, I'm probably more connected to your ancestor than anyone here." "Carrying stolen power doesn't make you family," Elder Kohaku snapped. "Stolen?" Now there was an edge to Naruto's voice that made even Hiashi straighten slightly. "That's what you think this is." Without warning, he activated his Tenseigan. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Every Hyuga in the courtyard staggered as their own Byakugan responded to the presence of their progenitor's true power. But it wasn't just activation, it was evolution. For a few seconds, each of them could see what Naruto saw, feel what he felt. The world expanded beyond the merely physical. They could perceive dimensions layered on dimensions, could sense the flow of time itself as it branched into infinite possibilities. They saw the threads of fate that connected all living things, the cosmic forces that held reality together, the vast web of cause and effect that stretched across galaxies. And underlying it all, they felt something that brought tears to their eyes, the infinite, patient love of someone who had sacrificed everything to protect a world that would never know his name. When the vision ended, several of the elders were on their knees. Elder Hohito's face was pale as ash, and his hands were shaking. "That was Hamura," Neji said quietly, his voice filled with awe. "Not just his power, his actual consciousness. His memories, his love for our clan, for this world, for the family he left behind," Hinata finished, understanding flooding through her. "The descendants he's watched over for 1,000 years, even when they forgot he existed." Naruto's eyes returned to their normal blue, but the weight of what they'd experienced lingered in the air like incense. "I didn't steal anything," he said softly. "I was chosen. Not because I'm special, not because I'm stronger than anyone else, but because I was willing to carry a burden that would have broken most people. Because when the time came to choose between my own happiness and protecting others, I chose to protect others." He looked directly at Elder Hohito, and there was no anger in his expression, only a sadness that seemed far older than his years. "I'm not here to take anything from your clan," he continued. I'm not here to claim leadership or demand recognition. I'm here because there's something coming that threatens everyone we care about, and we need to work together if we're going to have any hope of stopping it." "What kind of something?" Hiyashi asked, his voice carefully controlled. Before Naruto could answer, the air above the courtyard began to shimmer like heat haze. The distortion grew larger, more defined, until it coalesced into something that made everyone present take an instinctive step backward. The figure that emerged from the dimensional rift was tall and elegant, with pale skin and long white hair that seemed to move in a breeze none of them could feel. But it was the eyes that made Hinata's blood freeze white like the Byakugan, but containing depths that spoke of knowledge humanity was never meant to possess. "Otsutsuki," Naruto breathed, his hand already moving toward the kunai pouch at his waist. The figure's gaze swept across the assembled Hyuga, taking in their shocked expressions with something that might have been amusement. When it spoke, its voice carried the cold precision of winter stars. How interesting. The degraded bloodline still retains some sensitivity to proper power. Those terrible eyes fixed on Naruto. And you are the anomaly that has been creating such disturbances in the cosmic order. "Depends on your definition of disturbance," Naruto replied, his stance shifting into a combat position. "If by disturbance you mean not letting you harvest this world like a crop, then yeah, I guess that's me." The Otsutsuki smiled, and the expression was more terrifying than a snarl would have been. Clever, and informed, which is unexpected for such a primitive world. It took a step forward, and space seemed to bend around its feet. "I am Urashiki Otsutsuki, scout of the main clan. I have come to investigate the reports of impossible chakra signatures originating from this system." "Well, congratulations," Naruto said, chakra beginning to swirl around him in patterns that made the air itself sing. "You found what you were looking for. Indeed, a dual reincarnation manifesting both solar and lunar aspects simultaneously. Such a thing should be impossible, yet here you stand." Urashiki's smile widened. "The main clan will be very interested in studying you. They're welcome to try," Naruto said, and his voice carried the promise of violence. "But they'll have to go through me first. And us." Hinata's heart jumped as Neji stepped up beside Naruto, his Byakugan blazing with silver light. The curse mark was gone, she realized, not suppressed or hidden, but completely absent, as if it had never existed. "And us," Hiyashi added, moving to Naruto's other side. His own eyes had activated, and the power flowing through them was stronger than Hinata had ever seen from her father. One by one, the other Hyuga in the courtyard stepped forward. Even the elders, despite their earlier hostility, took positions around Naruto in a formation that spoke of generations of combat training. "How touching," Urashiki said, his voice dripping with mock sentiment. "The lesser bloodline seeks to protect its betters. Very well, you may observe how insignificant your evolved state truly is." What followed wasn't really a battle. Urashiki moved like liquid lightning, his every gesture reshaping reality around him. Where he pointed, gravity reversed. Where he gestured, time itself seemed to slow or accelerate. The very air became a weapon in his hands, compressed into blades that could cut through stone or expanded into barriers that deflected any attack. The Hyuga fought with everything they had. Gentle fist techniques that had been perfected over centuries, coordination that came from lifetimes of training together, determination born from protecting their home and family. But against an entity that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality, even their evolved abilities felt like children playing with wooden swords. Within minutes, most of them were down. Hiyashi lay unconscious against a shattered wall, his chakra system overloaded by attempting to process forces beyond its design. Neji was on his knees, blood streaming from his eyes as his enhanced Byakugan struggled to track an opponent who moved between dimensions. Even the elders, for all their prejudice and fear, had fought until they could no longer stand. Only Naruto remained upright. But as Hinata watched through eyes blurred with pain and fear, she saw something that made her heart sing despite their desperate situation. Naruto wasn't fighting alone anymore. The silver light of Hamura's legacy blazed around him like a second sun, but now it was joined by something else, golden radiance that spoke of protection and bonds and the refusal to surrender. Where the two energies met and mingled, they created something entirely new, something that made even Urashiki pause in his assault. "Impossible," the Otsutsuki breathed, "true synthesis. But the strain should destroy any mortal vessel." "Maybe," Naruto said, his voice echoing with harmonics that belonged to ages past. "But I've got something you don't understand." He gestured toward the fallen Hyuga around them, toward Hinata struggling to sit up despite her injuries, toward Neji still trying to stand despite his obvious pain. I've got people worth protecting, and when you're fighting for others, you can do impossible things. The technique he unleashed defied every law of physics that Hinata understood. It wasn't just a jutsu, it was a fundamental alteration of the local space-time continuum. The gravitational forces that had been working in Urashiki's favor suddenly reversed, creating a pocket of null space where normal cause and effect broke down entirely. Caught in the center of this impossible phenomenon, Urashiki's expression shifted from amusement to concern to something approaching fear. "This level of dimensional manipulation," he said, his voice tight with strain as he fought to maintain his position. "It exceeds even the main clan's theoretical models. How is a primitive world producing such power?" "Because this world isn't primitive," Naruto replied, his eyes blazing with the light of distant stars. "It's just been hiding what it's capable of, but now you've seen it. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Urashiki studied him for a long moment, weighing options that Hinata couldn't begin to guess at. Finally, he spoke. "I will report what I have witnessed here. The main clan will need to reassess their approach to this system." His form began to waver as he prepared to retreat. "Enjoy your victory, Anomaly. It will be your last." The dimensional rift closed with a sound like reality tearing, leaving the courtyard in sudden silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the settling of debris. Naruto swayed on his feet, the incredible power that had surrounded him fading like morning mist. For a moment, Hinata thought he might collapse, but somehow he remained standing as he turned to check on the fallen Hyuga. "Is everyone alive?" he asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Alive, yes," Neji said, accepting help to stand from one of the few branch house members who had avoided serious injury. "But barely, that thing." "What was it? A scout," Naruto said grimly, "which means the main force isn't far behind." He looked around at the assembled clan members, taking in their injuries and the fear that lingered in their eyes. "I'm sorry you got caught up in this. I knew my awakening would draw their attention, but I hoped we'd have more time to prepare." Elder Hohido, his earlier hostility replaced by something approaching respect, struggled to his feet with help from his grandson. You fought for us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Even after the way we treated you, you risked your life to protect our clan." "Of course I did," Naruto said, looking genuinely confused by the statement. "You're Hinata's family. You're part of this village. That makes you my responsibility." Hinata felt her heart skip at the casual way he included her in his reasoning for fighting. Not just duty to the village, but personal connection to her specifically. "Naruto-kun," she said softly, moving to his side as the immediate crisis passed. "Are you hurt?" He looked down at her, and despite everything that had just happened, he smiled. Not his usual boisterous grin, but something quieter and more intimate. "Nothing that won't heal," he said, then more seriously, "but this was just the beginning. That scout is going to report back to his clan, and when they come, we'll be ready," Hiashi interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of the clan head despite his obvious injuries. "All of us, together." He looked directly at Naruto, and there was no trace of the earlier political maneuvering in his expression. "The Hyuga clan formally recognizes your connection to our ancestor," he said, his words carrying the weight of ancient tradition. "Not as an outsider who has stolen power, but as one who carries Hamura's will and purpose. You have our loyalty, Naruto Uzumaki." "As clan heir," Elder Kohaku added, her voice shaky but determined, "I second that recognition. Whatever comes next, we face it as family." Naruto blinked in surprise, clearly not having expected such a complete reversal of the clan's position. "You don't have to." "Yes, we do," Neji interrupted. "Because you've shown us what we forgot in all our obsession with bloodlines and tradition. The power doesn't matter if you don't use it to protect what's precious to you." As the other clan members voiced their agreement, Hinata found herself standing closer to Naruto than strictly necessary. The warmth of his presence, the steady strength that radiated from him even in his exhausted state, made her feel safe in a way she'd never experienced before. "Naruto-kun," she said quietly, speaking for his ears alone. "What happens now?" He was quiet for a moment, looking up at the night sky where stars twinkled with their usual beauty, giving no hint of the cosmic threats that moved through the darkness between them. "Now we get ready for war," he said finally. "A war unlike anything this world has ever seen, but..." He looked down at her, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "At least I won't be fighting it alone." Above them, the moon hung pale and watchful in the night sky, and for those who knew how to look, its surface was no longer quite as empty as it appeared. Things were stirring in the ancient cities carved from lunar stone. Defenses that had been dormant for a millennium were powering up, their sensors turning toward the small blue world that hung like a jewel in their sky. The long sleep was ending. The real battle was about to begin. But in a courtyard within the Hyuga compound, surrounded by family both by blood and by choice, Naruto Uzumaki felt something he hadn't experienced since his awakening began: hope. The Alliance headquarters buzzed with controlled chaos. Maps covered every available surface, their edges weighed down with kunai and marked with symbols that represented troop movements, supply lines, and defensive positions. Messengers ran between stations carrying scrolls sealed with the marks of all 5 great villages, while communications specialists maintained constant contact with forces spread across 3 different battlefronts. At the center of it all stood Naruto, but he looked nothing like the boy who had struggled through the Chunin exams just 2 years ago. The changes went beyond the obvious physical differences. The way he carried himself with unconscious authority, the silver threads that now ran through his golden hair like captured moonbeams, the eyes that seemed to hold depths no human face should contain. It was the way seasoned Jonin deferred to his tactical decisions, the way the Reikage and Tsuchikage argued strategy with him as an equal, the way even Gaara looked to him for guidance when the situation grew desperate. The latest reports from the Eastern Front, Shikamaru said, approaching with a scroll bearing the seal of the Hokage's office. His voice was carefully neutral, but Naruto could see the exhaustion in his friend's posture. Managing intelligence for a war this complex was taking its toll on everyone. Naruto accepted the scroll and broke the seal, his enhanced perception allowing him to absorb the information far faster than should have been possible. What he read made his jaw tighten. "They're not just targeting military installations anymore," he said quietly, looking up from the report. 3 civilian villages hit in the last 12 hours. Clean strikes, no survivors, no obvious tactical value. "They're testing us," Sasuke observed from where he stood studying a 3-dimensional map created from chakra constructs. His own transformation over the past months had been equally dramatic. The curse mark completely purged from his system. His Sharingan evolved beyond its traditional limits. His entire chakra signature shifted towards something that resonated with Naruto's dual nature in ways that still surprised them both. "Testing what?" Temari asked sharply. She'd been appointed as soon as liaison to the Alliance, and the stress of coordinating between multiple village hierarchies showed in the tight lines around her eyes. "Our response time. Our willingness to sacrifice tactical advantage for humanitarian concerns, whether we'll abandon defensive positions to protect non-combatants." Sasuke's fingers traced patterns in the air, updating the chakra map to show the latest attack locations. "It's what I would do, force the enemy to reveal their priorities before committing to a full assault." Naruto studied the pattern of strikes, his Tenseigan automatically processing trajectories, timing, and resource allocation in ways that made his head ache. The mathematics of war had never been his strong suit, but with Hamura's ancient memories to draw upon, he found himself understanding strategic concepts that should have taken years to master. "It's not random," he said finally. "Look at the positions, they're not just testing our response. They're positioning themselves." He gestured, and silver chakra flowed from his fingers to create a duplicate of Sasuke's map, but with additional overlays showing energy patterns, dimensional distortions, and gravitational anomalies that only his enhanced senses could detect. "Each attack site sits on a convergence point," he continued, his voice taking on the harmonics that indicated he was drawing on memories older than civilization. "Places where the barriers between dimensions grow thin. They're not just testing us, they're setting up staging areas for a massive invasion." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Everyone present had grown accustomed to thinking in terms of conventional warfare, armies clashing on battlefields, villages defending territory, supply lines, and strategic objectives. But an enemy that could strike from other dimensions entirely rendered most traditional tactics meaningless. "How many convergence points are there?" The Reikage's voice came from the communication array, his image flickering slightly as the long-range jutsu struggled to maintain the connection. Naruto closed his eyes and let his awareness expand, feeling for the telltale distortions that marked dimensional weak points. What he found made his stomach clench. Too many. They're scattered across all the major nations, some in places we can't possibly defend. He opened his eyes, and several people in the room took involuntary steps backward at the cosmic depths they briefly glimpsed there. "We can't play defense against this kind of threat. We need to take the fight to them." How? Gaara asked through his own communication link. If they can attack from other dimensions, what's stopping them from simply avoiding any force we send after them? It was Sasuke who answered, his Sharingan spinning as he studied the dimensional overlays with enhanced perception. We don't chase them through dimensions, he said slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. We collapse the dimensions themselves. Every person in the room turned to stare at him, and Naruto felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The technique Sasuke was suggesting existed in Hamura's memories, but it had never been attempted on this scale. Never been attempted by anyone who wasn't already a cosmic-level entity. That's Shikamaru started, then stopped, his tactical mind working through the implications. That's not just dangerous, it's potentially catastrophic. If something goes wrong, we might crack the planet in half, Naruto finished quietly. But if we don't try, we'll definitely lose everything anyway. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the headquarters. The communication arrays crackled with urgent reports from scout teams, their voices tight with panic and disbelief. Massive chakra signature appearing over the eastern front, dimensional rifts opening simultaneously across multiple locations. Unknown entities emerging counts are. This can't be right. Naruto was already moving, his enhanced senses reaching out to assess the situation. What he found made his blood freeze. The enemy wasn't just positioning for invasion anymore. The invasion had begun. And leading it was a chakra signature he recognized from ancient memories, one that carried the weight of millennia and the promise of extinction for any world unlucky enough to draw its attention. Kaguya, he breathed. The word hit the room like a physical blow. Everyone present knew the legends, knew what the return of the rabbit goddess meant for their world. Impossible, Temari whispered. She was sealed permanently. The Sage of Six Paths himself. The sage sealed her with techniques based on the assumption that she was the ultimate threat, Naruto interrupted, his voice carrying harmonics that belonged to voices far older than his own. But she wasn't the predator, she was the prey. The implications of that statement sent shockwaves through the assembled leaders. If Kaguya, the entity so powerful it had taken the combined might of Hagoromo and Hamura to defeat, was running from something even more dangerous. Orders, sir? Shikamaru asked, falling back on military protocol to cope with the overwhelming scope of what they were facing. Naruto was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that could determine the fate of not just their world but potentially countless others. Finally, he spoke. All defensive positions are now secondary. I want every available shinobi converging on the eastern front, but maintain distance until we can assess the full scope of what we're dealing with. He turned to Sasuke. You're with me? If we're going to attempt dimensional collapse, we'll need perfect synchronization. And if Kaguya tries to negotiate, Sasuke asked. Naruto's expression grew grim. Then we listen very carefully to what she's running from. The journey to the eastern front took them across landscapes that had been transformed by weeks of warfare. Forests reduced to stumps and ash, rivers running red with blood and chakra residue, entire mountains carved away by techniques that pushed the boundaries of what human ninja could achieve. But as they drew closer to their destination, the destruction took on a different quality. This wasn't the chaotic devastation of battle, it was the systematic eradication that came from entities operating on a scale beyond human comprehension. Look at the craters, Sasuke observed as they traveled, his Sharingan active and tracking energy patterns invisible to normal perception. Perfect spheres, no blast residue, no evidence of technique interaction. It's like portions of reality were just removed. Naruto nodded grimly, his Tenseigan showing him details that made his enhanced understanding of physics rebel in confusion. Truth-seeking orbs, but not like any I've seen before. These aren't just negating matter, they're negating the fundamental forces that allow matter to exist. They crested a ridge overlooking what had once been a major staging area for Alliance forces, and both stopped short at what they saw below. The battlefield wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a study in impossible geometry, where straight lines curved back on themselves and solid ground existed in layers that shouldn't be able to occupy the same space. At the center of it all, surrounded by distortions that made the eye water to look upon, stood a figure that radiated power like a second sun. Kaguya Otsutsuki was exactly as she appeared in Hamura's memories, pale as moonlight, with long white hair that moved in winds from other dimensions. Her Byakugan blazed with power that made the air itself bend around her, and the horn protruding from her forehead pulsed with energies that spoke of connections to forces beyond mortal understanding. But it was the way she stood that made Naruto's breath catch. Not the proud, commanding posture of a conqueror, but the hunched, desperate stance of someone who had been running for far too long. "She's afraid," Sasuke said quietly, his enhanced perception reading the subtle signs in her body language. "Terrified, actually." Before Naruto could respond, Kaguya's head snapped up, her pale eyes fixing on their position with uncomfortable accuracy. When she spoke, her voice carried across the impossible distance with crystalline clarity. "The dual inheritor, you have awakened at last." There was no mockery in her tone, no arrogance. Only a desperate hope that made Naruto's chest tight. "Perhaps there is still time." She gestured, and space folded around them like origami. Suddenly they were standing on the transformed battlefield, close enough to see the tears streaming down her alabaster cheeks. "Time for what?" Naruto asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral despite the cosmic power radiating from the woman before him. "To save your world from the fate that claimed mine," Kaguya replied. "To prevent the harvest that even now approaches through the dark between stars." She raised her hand, and chakra flowed from her fingers to create images in the air, visions of worlds beyond counting, each one lush and vibrant with life. Then the images changed, showing the same worlds after the harvest had passed. Barren stone, devoid of atmosphere, their very substance drained away to feed hungries that spanned galaxies. "My clan calls it cultivation," she continued, her voice heavy with centuries of guilt. "We plant the god tree, allow civilizations to develop around its roots, then return when the fruit is ripe. World after world, species after species, all of it consumed to feed our endless appetite for power." "But you chose differently," Naruto said, understanding beginning to dawn. "I fell in love," Kaguya admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "With this world, with its people, with the possibilities I saw in what they might become. So I betrayed my clan, consumed the fruit myself, tried to use its power to hide Earth from their sight. And now they've found us anyway," Sasuke concluded grimly. Kaguya nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "The convergence that created you, the dual reincarnation that should have been impossible, it sent ripples through dimensions that no barrier could contain. They know what has awakened here and they are coming to claim it." "How long do we have?" Naruto asked. "Days, perhaps hours. The main fleet has already entered your system and their advanced scouts." She gestured toward the horizon where new dimensional rifts were beginning to tear open. "They test your defenses even now." As if summoned by her words, shapes began emerging from the rifts. At first glance they might have been mistaken for human, but the wrongness in their proportions, the way they moved through space without regard for physics, marked them as something else entirely. "Otsutsuki shock troops," Kaguya said, her voice tight with old fear. "The weakest members of my clan, barely above the level of your strongest shinobi, but they number in the thousands, and behind them come entities that make even me seem insignificant." Naruto felt the familiar fire ignite in his chest, but this time it was tempered by the cold clarity of cosmic awareness. This wasn't just about protecting his village anymore. It was about protecting an entire world, an entire species, from predators that had been perfecting their techniques since before Earth's sun had finished forming. "Then we stop them here," he said simply. Both Kaguya and Sasuke stared at him as if he'd announced his intention to hold back the ocean with his bare hands. "You don't understand," Kaguya said desperately. "The entities coming, some of them predate the formation of galaxies. Their power exceeds anything your world has ever produced. Even working together, we cannot." "Maybe we can't win," Naruto interrupted, golden and silver chakra beginning to swirl around him like liquid starlight. "But we can make them pay such a price for this world that they'll think twice before trying to harvest another one." He looked at Sasuke, seeing his own determination reflected in his friend's expression. Then he turned back to Kaguya, extending his hand in an offer that transcended their species' ancient enmities. "Help us," he said simply, "not as the rabbit goddess or the mother of chakra, but as someone who loves this world enough to fight for it." For a long moment, Kaguya stared at the offered hand. Then slowly she reached out and took it. The moment their chakra made contact, reality around them exploded into impossible colors. 3 different aspects of cosmic power: Ashura's solar legacy, Hamura's lunar inheritance, and Kaguya's stolen, divine fruit, merged and harmonized in ways that physics had no words to describe. When the light faded, the 3 of them stood at the center of a zone of altered spacetime that stretched for miles in every direction. Where their combined power touched the ground, new structures began emerging, not buildings, but geometric forms that existed in more dimensions than human perception could process. "Now," Naruto said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the approaching Otsutsuki falter in their advance, "let's show them what happens when Earth fights back." what followed wasn't really a battle. It was a demonstration of what three entities working in perfect harmony could accomplish when the stakes were literally cosmic. Sasuke's Rinnegan blazed as he took control of the dimensional rifts themselves, turning the enemy's means of arrival into weapons against them. Portals that should have disgorged shock troops instead became gravitational anomalies that compressed matter into singularities. Kaguya moved through the transformed battlefield like liquid moonlight, her mastery of spacetime allowing her to be in dozens of places simultaneously. Where she gestured, reality folded in ways that turned the Otsutsuki's own techniques against them. And at the center of it all, Naruto stood as a bridge between Earth and Cosmos, his dual heritage allowing him to channel forces that exceeded anything the invaders had prepared for. Truth-seeking orbs orbited around him like miniature planets, each one containing enough power to unmake small mountains. But more than that, his very presence was changing the fundamental nature of the local spacetime continuum. The moon above began to glow with silver light as ancient systems responded to his power. Across the planet, every Hyuga felt their abilities expand beyond anything they had imagined possible. And deep in hidden sanctuaries, weapons that had slept since the Age of Myths began to stir. But even as they pushed back the initial assault, Naruto could sense something vast approaching through the dark between worlds. Something that made even their combined might feel inadequate. The real war was just beginning. But for the first time since his awakening started, Naruto felt truly ready for whatever came next. He was no longer just the container of the Nine Tails, or even the dual reincarnation of ancient brothers. He was something new, a synthesis of human determination and cosmic power that had never existed before. And he was going to make sure that Earth's first contact with the galactic community was one they would never forget. 1 year had passed since the battle that changed everything. Naruto stood on the observation deck of what everyone had taken to calling the Luna Base, a sprawling complex of crystalline structures that had grown across the moon's surface like some impossible garden. The architecture defied human understanding, all flowing curves and impossible angles that somehow managed to feel both alien and welcoming at the same time. Through the transparent walls, Earth hung in the star-filled void like a blue-green jewel, peaceful and beautiful, and completely unaware of the cosmic storm that was about to break over it. The outer sensor arrays are picking up massive distortions in the Kuiper Belt, Sasuke reported, his voice tight with controlled tension as he studied the holographic displays that filled the command center. Whatever's coming, it's big enough to bend spacetime just by moving through it. Naruto nodded, his enhanced senses already aware of the approaching threat. The Tenseigan allowed him to perceive disturbances across vast distances, and what he was seeing made his blood run cold. The entity approaching their system wasn't just powerful, it was ancient beyond comprehension, carrying with it the accumulated might of 1,000 conquered worlds. How long until they reach Earth? He asked, though part of him already knew the answer. At current velocity, maybe 6 hours, Kaguya said from where she floated near the tactical displays, her pale form seeming almost translucent in the artificial light. The year of preparation had been kind to her, the constant fear that had marked her features was gone, replaced by something that might actually be hope. But they could accelerate if they detect our defensive preparations. The defenses in question were unlike anything human civilization had ever attempted. The Luna Base itself was just the most visible part of a network that stretched across the entire solar system sensor, arrays hidden in asteroid fields, weapon platforms disguised as space debris, and most importantly, the dimensional anchors that would prevent their enemies from simply bypassing physical space entirely. It had taken the combined efforts of every major nation on Earth to make it possible. The hidden villages working together not as rivals, but as components of a single defensive network. Scientific knowledge shared freely between former enemies. Resources pooled without regard for national borders or traditional allegiances. And at the center of it all, Naruto had somehow found himself in a role he'd never expected to fill. Supreme Commander, Shikamaru said, approaching with a communication scroll bearing the seals of all 5 Kage, the final defensive positions are ready. All forces are in position and awaiting your orders. Supreme Commander. The title still felt strange, even after a year of wearing it. Not Hokage, that honor still belonged to Tsunade, though she'd been more than willing to delegate military command to someone whose abilities transcended normal human limitations. Not emperor or dictator or any of the other terms that ambitious men used to justify their hunger for power. Just someone who had stepped up when the world needed leadership and somehow convinced everyone else that he was worth following. "Any word from the Deep Space Scouts?" Naruto asked, though he was already reaching out with his enhanced senses to check on the small teams they'd positioned throughout the outer system. "Scout Team Alpha went silent 3 hours ago," Sasuke reported grimly. "Their last transmission was disturbing," he gestured, and the air above the tactical display shimmered into a three-dimensional recreation of the scouts' final moments. Naruto watched as the small team of elite Jonin, volunteers all, knowing the risks, encountered something that defied description. The entity that had found them wasn't quite solid, existing as much in adjacent dimensions as in normal space. When it moved, reality seemed to bend around it like heated glass. And when it spoke, "The anomaly approaches convergence," the thing said, its voice somehow reaching across vacuum to be heard by the recording equipment. "The cycle must be completed, the harvest must proceed." Then the scouts were simply gone, not killed, not destroyed, erased, as if they had never existed in the first place. "Cheerful," Naruto muttered, but his expression was grim. "At least we know what they're calling me now." "The anomaly," Kaguya repeated thoughtfully. "In their language, it carries connotations of both great promise and terrible threat. Something that could either elevate their species beyond its current limitations or destroy everything they've built across eons." "And which do they think I am?" "Both," she said simply. "That's why they're coming in such force. If you truly represent evolution beyond their current state, they need to either claim that power or ensure it can never threaten them." Before Naruto could respond, every alarm in the Luna base began screaming at once. The tactical displays exploded with new information as sensors across the solar system detected something that shouldn't be possible. "They're here," Sasuke breathed, his sharingan spinning as he tried to process the incoming data. "But that's impossible. The outer sensors showed them still hours away." "They folded space," Naruto realized, his Tenseigan showing him distortions that normal sensors couldn't detect. "Compress the distance between there and here into nothing." "Which means—" The viewport filled with light as something massive materialized in the space between Earth and the Moon. Not a ship in any sense that human minds could understand, but rather a structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It was beautiful in the way that natural disasters were beautiful, vast, and terrible, and completely beyond human scale. "Greetings, anomaly," a voice said, somehow reaching across vacuum and through the Luna base's shields to speak directly into their minds. "I am Momoshiki Otsutsuki, Harvester of Worlds, Seeker of Power. You have something that belongs to my clan." "Funny," Naruto replied, letting his own voice carry across the void through techniques that bent the laws of physics. "I was going to say the same thing to you." The response was immediate and violent. Reality cracked. That was the only way Naruto's enhanced perception could process what happened next. The space around the Luna base simply fractured like glass, revealing glimpses of dimensions where different physical laws applied. Through the cracks came entities that hurt to look at, directly beings of such power that their mere presence warped local space-time. Momoshiki himself was smaller than Naruto had expected, but the wrongness that surrounded him more than made up for his lack of physical presence. He moved through vacuum as easily as walking through air, and where his feet touched empty space, platforms of crystallized energy formed to support him. Beside him came others, Kinshiki, massive and angular like a living weapon. Urashiki, whom they'd encountered before but who now radiated far more power than he'd shown during his scouting mission. And others whose names existed only in Kaguya's most terrible memories. But it was the thing that came last that made even Naruto take an involuntary step backward. It didn't have a name that human minds could comprehend. It was older than galaxies, a remnant of the universe's youth when the laws of physics were still settling into their current forms. The Otsutsuki clan didn't command it so much as they had made a bargain with it power in exchange for feeding its endless hunger. "The Devourer," Kaguya whispered, her face pale with terror. "I thought it was just legend, a story told to frighten young Otsutsuki into obedience. But it's real, it's actually real." The entity she spoke of existed as much in thought as in matter, a writhing mass of contradictions that seemed to consume light itself. Where it moved, stars dimmed in distant galaxies, their energy drained across impossible distances to feed its appetite. "Indeed," Momoshiki continued, his mental voice carrying amusement at their obvious fear. "The Devourer has taken a personal interest in this system. Your little display of power has attracted attention from entities that predate your species by eons." Then they can get in line, Naruto said, golden and silver chakra beginning to swirl around him as he prepared for battle. Because I've got something to say about anyone who thinks they can just roll up and eat my world. The Luna base's weapon systems came online with a sound like thunder given form. Across the lunar surface, defense platforms that had been disguised as craters revealed their true nature, bristling with technology that merged ninja techniques with scientific principles. And deep beneath the moon's surface, ancient systems that had slept since Hamura's time began to stir. But even as Earth's defenders prepared for battle, Naruto could sense something else approaching through the dimensional fractures. More Otsutsuki, dozens of them, each one carrying power that would have made them godlike on any lesser world. This isn't just an invasion, he realized aloud. This is their entire clan. Everything they've got. Correct, Momoshiki confirmed. The anomaly represents either our evolution or our extinction. There can be no middle ground. The first exchanges were almost casual probing attacks designed to test defenses and reveal capabilities. Kinshiki launched himself across the void with speed that left trails of burning spacetime in his wake, only to meet barriers of crystallized moonlight that Naruto conjured with gestures that seemed to bend reality around them. Urashiki attempted to manipulate time itself, trying to trap the defenders in temporal loops that would leave them helpless. But Sasuke's evolved Sharingan could track distortions across multiple timelines simultaneously, and his counter techniques turned the Otsutsuki's own abilities against them. Meanwhile, Kaguya danced through dimensions like liquid starlight, her mastery of space allowing her to be in dozens of places at once. Where she appeared, reality itself became a weapon, gravity reversing, molecular bonds dissolving, the fundamental forces that held matter together simply ceasing to function. For a few minutes, it almost looked like they might hold their own. Then the Devourer joined the battle. The ancient entity didn't attack so much as it simply existed more intensely. Where its attention focused, the carefully constructed defenses of the Luna base began to unravel at the quantum level. Energy barriers designed to stop planet-killing attacks dissolved like mist. Weapons that channeled the power of stars simply ceased to function. It's not just draining our power, Sasuke shouted over the sound of reality screaming under the strain. It's unmaking the concepts that make our techniques possible. Naruto felt it too, the way his own abilities began to falter as the entity's hunger touched them. The Tenseigan's cosmic awareness became clouded, showing him glimpses of potential futures where Earth was nothing but empty space and the screams of dying civilizations. But there was something else in those visions, something the Devourer couldn't consume because it existed outside the normal flow of cause and effect. Choice. The power to choose differently, to write new rules when the old ones failed, to become something that had never existed before. Sasuke, Naruto called out, extending his hand toward his friend. Remember what we learned during the war. When we work together, we can do impossible things, Sasuke finished, grasping the offered hand without hesitation. The moment their chakra merged, the battlefield changed. Where once there had been three separate fighters, Naruto with his dual inheritance, Sasuke with his evolved Sharingan, Kaguya with her stolen divine power, now there was something new. A trinity of power that resonated across dimensions, creating harmonies in the cosmic background radiation that hadn't been heard since the universe was young. The Devourer paused in its assault, and for the first time since the battle began, something like uncertainty flickered in its ancient consciousness. Impossible, Momoshiki breathed, his composed facade cracking as he witnessed something that shouldn't exist. Three aspects achieving perfect synchronization without merger. The mathematics alone should prevent such a state from manifesting. Maybe your mathematics are wrong, Naruto said, his voice carrying harmonics that made nearby asteroids ring like bells. Maybe there are things in this universe that can't be reduced to equations and energy levels. Such as? The Devourer's mental voice carried genuine curiosity now, its hunger temporarily set aside in favor of something that might have been academic interest. Naruto smiled, and the expression somehow managed to be visible across the vacuum of space. Love, hope, the decision to protect something even when the smart thing would be to run away. He gestured toward the blue world hanging in the void below them. The choice to be something better than what came before. What followed wasn't really a battle in any conventional sense. It was more like a conversation conducted in the language of reality-altering techniques, each exchange revealing new aspects of power that transcended physical law. The Otsutsuki clan fought with abilities refined across eons of conquest. Techniques that could unmake planets, redirect the course of stars, rewrite the fundamental constants that governed physics. They were older, more experienced, individually more powerful than their human opponents. But they had forgotten something in their long climb toward cosmic supremacy. They had forgotten what it meant to fight for something other than themselves. Naruto and his allies fought not just with power, but with purpose. Every technique was guided not by hunger or ambition, but by the simple determination to protect what they loved. And somehow, impossibly, that made all the difference. When Kinshiki's reality-cutting blades met barriers woven from pure determination, the barriers held. When Momoshiki attempted to drain the life force from entire star systems to fuel his attacks, the energy was turned aside by defenses powered by the collective will of billions of lives that refused to be consumed. And when the Devourer itself reached out to consume the very concept of resistance, it found itself facing something it had never encountered before, a force that grew stronger the more it was challenged. The turning point came when Naruto did something that violated every rule of combat the Otsutsuki understood. Instead of trying to defeat his enemies, he tried to save them. "What are you doing?" Momoshiki demanded as silver light began to surround not just the defenders but the attackers as well. "This power, it should be destroying us, not healing the damage that eons of conquest did to your souls," Naruto finished. "Yeah, I know, probably seems pretty stupid from your perspective." The light intensified, and suddenly the battlefield became something else entirely. A place where past and present existed simultaneously, where the Otsutsuki could see themselves as they had been before the hunger consumed them. Young, curious beings who had once looked at the stars with wonder rather than appetite. "Stop this," the Devourer commanded, but its voice carried uncertainty now. "You do not understand what you are attempting. The hunger is not mere desire, it is existence itself. Without it, we are nothing." "Maybe," Naruto acknowledged, "but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe being nothing is better than being something that devours entire civilizations to feed its own emptiness." The ancient entity was silent for a long moment, processing concepts that it had not considered for eons. Finally, it spoke. "You would offer us oblivion in place of eternal hunger." "I'd offer you choice," Naruto corrected. "The same choice every thinking being faces. What kind of existence do you want to have? What legacy do you want to leave behind?" For the first time in cosmic ages, the Devourer hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, something impossible happened. The hunger that had driven it across galaxies, that had consumed civilizations beyond counting, began to transform. Not disappearing, but changing into something else. Something that sought not to devour, but to nurture. Not to consume, but to create. The effect rippled outward through the assembled Otsutsuki fleet, reaching beings who had not felt anything but hunger for so long they had forgotten other emotions were possible. Ancient warriors found themselves remembering what it felt like to protect rather than conquer. Cosmic predators suddenly understood the difference between taking what they wanted and earning what they needed. "This is unprecedented," Momoshiki said slowly, his voice carrying something that might have been wonder. "To offer transformation rather than destruction, to choose healing over victory. That's what makes us different," Sasuke observed, his sharing and showing him the way reality was reshaping itself around them. "We don't fight to prove we're stronger. We fight to protect what matters to us." The battle was over, though no one had technically won or lost. Instead, something entirely new had been created, a synthesis of power and purpose that transcended the old cycles of predator and prey. But even as the immediate crisis passed, Naruto's enhanced senses detected something else stirring in the deep void between galaxies. The transformation of the Otsutsuki and their ancient ally had sent ripples across dimensions, attracting the attention of entities that made even the Devourer seem small by comparison. "This isn't the end," he realized aloud. "It's just the beginning." "Indeed," Momoshiki agreed, his entire bearing changed by what he had experienced. "There are forces in this universe that predate even the Devourer. Ancient guardians who maintain the boundaries between realities. They will have sensed what occurred here. And they'll come to investigate," Kaguya added, her expression troubled, "to determine whether this transformation represents evolution or corruption." Naruto looked out at the stars, feeling the weight of cosmic attention focusing on their small corner of the universe. The battle they had just fought was over, but the war for the soul of reality itself was just beginning. But for the first time since his awakening began, he felt truly ready for whatever came next. Not because he was strong enough to face it alone, but because he was no longer alone. The age of isolated worlds was ending. The age of cosmic community, with all its challenges and possibilities, was about to begin. And somewhere in the space between heartbeats, between one moment and the next, the universe itself held its breath to see what would emerge from this unprecedented convergence of power and purpose. The real story was just beginning. The moon's surface had become a battlefield between gods. Naruto stood at the center of what had once been the Sea of Tranquility, but tranquility was the furthest thing from this place now. The ancient lunar landscape had been transformed into something that defied physics' crystalline spires reaching toward Earth like grasping fingers, chasms that seemed to plunge into other dimensions entirely, and structures that existed in geometries human minds weren't equipped to process. Above him, reality itself was coming apart. The entities that had come to investigate the Otsutsuki transformation weren't merely powerful, they were fundamental forces given consciousness, aspects of existence so basic that their very presence warped the fabric of space-time. They called themselves the Arbiters, and they had arrived to determine whether the unprecedented synthesis of cosmic powers represented evolution or corruption. The anomaly has exceeded all predictive models, the largest of them intoned, its voice reverberating across dimensions. It appeared as a constantly shifting geometric form, sometimes resembling a vast eye, other times a tree whose branches reached across galaxies. The merger of solar and lunar aspects should have resulted in mutual annihilation. Instead, it has created something entirely new. New does not necessarily mean better, another arbiter added, this one manifesting as a writhing mass of equations that hurt to look at directly. The last time such synthesis was attempted, it resulted in the collapse of 17 star systems. We cannot permit such instability to spread. Naruto felt the weight of their attention like a physical force, pressing down on him with the mass of collapsing stars. Around him, his allies Sasuke, Kaguya, even the transformed Otsutsuki who had once been their enemies, struggled to remain standing under the cosmic pressure. "So what's the verdict?" Naruto asked, his voice carrying harmonics that made the lunar surface ring like a bell. "Are you here to judge me or just to clean up what you think is a mess?" "We are here to offer you a choice," the first arbiter replied. "The synthesis you have achieved is indeed unprecedented, but it comes at a cost that extends far beyond your single world. The resonance patterns you generate when you access your full power are destabilizing the cosmic framework itself." Images appeared in the space around them, star maps showing distortions spreading outward from Earth's position, reality itself developing cracks that could eventually tear apart the fundamental structure of existence. "You must choose," the second arbiter continued. "Embrace one aspect of your dual nature and abandon the other, maintaining cosmic stability at the cost of your personal evolution. Or continue as you are, knowing that your very existence may eventually unravel the foundations of reality itself." The choice hung in the air like a sword above his head. Naruto could feel both aspects of his inherited nature stirring in response to the ultimatum, Ashura's solar legacy pulling him toward the path of protection and bonds, while Hamura's lunar inheritance urged him toward cosmic responsibility and necessary sacrifice. "How long do I have to decide?" he asked. "The choice must be made now," the geometric arbiter said. "The resonance cascade has already begun. Every moment you delay brings reality closer to total collapse." Naruto closed his eyes and reached inward, seeking the voices that had guided him through his awakening. But for the first time since his dual heritage had manifested, Hagoromo and Hamura were silent. This was a choice he would have to make alone. "Naruto," Sasuke said quietly, his sharing in showing him the cosmic forces at play around them. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." "As am I," Kaguya added, her pale eyes reflecting depths of sorrow and understanding. "I chose love over duty once before. I will not judge you for whatever choice you make now." Naruto felt a smile tug at his lips despite the impossible situation. Even facing entities that could unmake galaxies, his friends stood with him. That was something the Arbiters clearly didn't understand, the power that came not from cosmic forces or inherited legacies, but from the bonds between people who chose to face the impossible together. "I've made my choice," he said, opening his eyes to meet the Arbiters' alien attention. "Speak it," they commanded in unison. "I choose both," Naruto said simply. "And I choose neither." The Arbiters' forms flickered with what might have been confusion. "That is not a valid option. The synthesis cannot." "Cannot what?" Naruto interrupted, golden and silver chakra beginning to spiral around him in patterns that made spacetime itself sing. "Cannot exist because your equations say it's impossible. Cannot work because it's never been done before." He took a step forward, and the moon's surface rippled beneath his feet like liquid. You know what I've learned over the past few years? Impossible is just another word for hasn't been figured out yet. And I'm really good at figuring things out. The power that erupted from him then was unlike anything he had accessed before. Not the raw force of the Nine Tails, not the cosmic awareness of the Ten Seigon, not even the harmonized might of his dual inheritance. This was something entirely new, a synthesis that transcended the very concept of opposing forces. Where golden solar energy met silver lunar radiance, they didn't clash or merge. Instead, they created something that had never existed in the cosmos before, a third type of energy that was simultaneously both and neither, containing infinite potential while requiring no external source to sustain itself. Impossible, the equation arbiter breathed, its mathematical certainty wavering for the first time in eons. The energy readings, they indicate complete stability with infinite output. Such a state violates the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. Maybe your laws need updating, Naruto replied, his voice carrying harmonics that rewrote reality around them as he spoke. But even as he accessed this unprecedented power, he could feel the price it demanded. The human mind wasn't designed to channel forces this fundamental, and his consciousness began to fragment under the strain. He could feel aspects of his personality splitting away, the part of him that was purely Naruto Uzumaki, the inherited memories of Ashura, the cosmic awareness of Hamura. For a terrifying moment, he felt himself scattering across dimensions, his sense of self spreading so thin it might never coalesce again. The temptation to let go, to dissolve into the cosmic forces he was wielding, was almost overwhelming. Then he heard a voice that cut through the chaos of fragmenting identity. Naruto, don't you dare give up on me now. Hinata stood at the edge of the transformed battlefield, her Byakugan blazing with power that resonated with his own lunar heritage. Behind her came others, Sakura with medical chakra that could heal wounds in reality itself, Kakashi with Sharingan techniques adapted to cosmic scales, even Gaara with sand that could somehow exist in the vacuum of space. His friends, his bonds, the connections that defined who he was beyond any inherited power or cosmic destiny. The support network is attempting to anchor his consciousness, the geometric arbiter observed with something that might have been admiration. Such dedication in being so individually limited is unexpected. It's not limitation, Sasuke said, his own power flaring as he helped stabilize the reality distortions around Naruto. It's focus. We don't need to be cosmic forces, we just need to be there for our friend. The anchoring worked. Instead of scattering across dimensions, Naruto's fragmented consciousness began to pull back together, guided by the bonds that connected him to the people who mattered most. But the reunification came with a cost. He could feel both inherited aspects of his nature burning away, consumed by the process of creating something entirely new. The ancient memories of Ashura and Hamura faded like dreams upon waking. The vast cosmic awareness that had let him perceive the flow of reality itself dimmed to human levels. Even the enhanced physical abilities that had made him more than mortal began to ebb. But in their place, something else emerged. Not power in the traditional sense, but a capacity for choice that transcended even cosmic law. The ability to look at any situation, no matter how impossible, and say, this can be different. Remarkable, the first arbiter said, its shifting form stabilizing into something almost resembling approval. You have voluntarily surrendered godlike power in exchange for something far more dangerous, true free will. Dangerous how? Naruto asked, surprised to find his voice had returned to its normal human range. Because free will, exercised with sufficient determination, can rewrite the fundamental rules of existence, the second arbiter explained. It is the one force we cannot predict, control, or counter. And you have somehow concentrated it to an unprecedented degree. Naruto looked down at his hands, seeing chakra flow through them in patterns that were completely ordinary by the standards he'd grown accustomed to. But there was something else there, a potential that felt infinite precisely because it wasn't bound by cosmic law or inherited legacy. So what happens now? He asked. Now you prove whether our concern was justified, the geometric arbiter replied. You have chosen to transcend the ancient cycles, to become something that has never existed before. The question is whether that something will enhance or endanger the cosmic order. The arbiters began to withdraw, their forms becoming translucent as they prepared to return to whatever realm they inhabited. We will be watching, they said in unison, and if your evolution proves destructive, You'll stop me, Naruto finished with a nod. I get it, but I don't think you'll need to. Because the thing you don't understand about humans is that we're at our best when we're protecting something we love. After the arbiters faded from perception, the transformed lunar battlefield began to settle into something approaching normalcy. The crystalline spires receded, the dimensional chasms sealed themselves, and the moon's ancient surface reasserted its familiar appearance. How do you feel? Sasuke asked, studying his friend with enhanced perception. Naruto considered the question seriously. He felt smaller in some ways. The vast cosmic awareness was gone, replaced by purely human senses. The ability to manipulate fundamental forces had faded, leaving him with chakra levels that, while still impressive, were entirely within mortal limits. But he also felt more solid, more real, more genuinely himself than he had since his awakening began. I feel like me, he said finally. Not Ashura's reincarnation, not Hamura's inheritor, not some cosmic anomaly. Just me, Naruto Uzumaki. And that's enough, Kaguya asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Naruto grinned, and the expression was purely, recognizably human. It's everything, he said. Because being human means I get to choose who I become every single day. No destiny to fulfill, no ancient legacy to live up to, no cosmic purpose to serve. Just the chance to wake up tomorrow and decide to be a little better than I was today. As Earth rose over the lunar horizon, bathing them all in blue-green light, Naruto felt something settle into place in his chest. Not power in the cosmic sense, but something infinitely more precious, the absolute certainty that whatever came next, he would face it as himself. The age of inherited destiny was ending. The age of chosen purpose was about to begin. And somewhere in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the universe itself seemed to nod in approval. 5 years later, the world had become something unrecognizable. Not in the way of destruction or conquest, but in the way that a caterpillar becomes unrecognizable after its transformation. Earth still hung in the same orbit, still spun with the same rhythm, but everything about how its inhabitants understood their place in the universe had changed. Naruto stood on the observation deck of what everyone now called the Nexus, a structure that existed simultaneously on Earth, the Moon, and in 3 other dimensions, serving as both embassy and defense platform for humanity's growing role in the cosmic community. Through the transparent walls, he could see representatives from 17 different species conducting trade negotiations, cultural exchanges, and collaborative research projects. The Otsutsuki, transformed by their encounter with true choice rather than hunger, had become humanity's most unexpected allies. Their advanced understanding of dimensional mechanics, combined with human creativity and determination, had led to breakthroughs that neither species could have achieved alone. The vegan delegation is requesting another meeting about mineral rights in the asteroid belt, Shikamaru reported, approaching with a stack of diplomatic scrolls that would have given the old him nightmares. But the current version of Shikamaru, enhanced by proximity to cosmic forces, but still fundamentally, human-handled interstellar politics with the same lazy efficiency he'd once applied to cloud watching. Which vegans? Naruto asked, not looking away from the bustling activity below. The crystalline ones who communicate through harmonic resonance, or the energy beings who think physical matter is a primitive concept? The crystalline ones. They're offering advanced terraforming technology in exchange for exclusive harvesting rights to 3 asteroid clusters. Shikamaru paused, consulting his notes. Also, they want to know if you'd be willing to mediate their territorial dispute with the Centauri Collective. Apparently, your reputation as someone who chooses impossible solutions has spread pretty far through this galactic arm. Naruto sighed, feeling the weight of responsibilities he'd never asked for but couldn't bring himself to abandon. Being the bridge, the entity that connected Earth to the wider universe, came with obligations that extended far beyond his home world. Schedule it for next week, he said finally, but make sure Hinata's there for the negotiation. Her analytical skills work better with crystalline psychology than mine do. The mention of his wife brought a smile to his face despite the diplomatic headaches. Their wedding 3 years ago had been more than just a personal celebration. It had become a symbol of the new age they were building, where human bonds could coexist with cosmic responsibilities. Speaking of Hinata, Shikamaru said with the tone of someone delivering news they weren't sure would be welcome, she's in the medical wing, says there's something she needs to discuss with you. Naruto's smile faltered slightly. Is she hurt? I know the last diplomatic mission to the Orion sector was rougher than expected. She's fine, Shikamaru assured him quickly. Just go talk to her. And Naruto, his expression grew more serious. Whatever she tells you, remember that being the bridge doesn't mean you have to carry every burden alone. The medical wing of the Nexus was a marvel of integrated technology, human medical knowledge, enhanced by Otsutsuki biomanipulation techniques and healing methods borrowed from a dozen different species. But as Naruto approached the private room where Hinata waited, he barely noticed the advanced equipment. She was sitting on the edge of an examination table, still wearing the formal robes she'd worn to the morning's cultural exchange summit. Her pale eyes were bright with something that might have been excitement, nervousness, or both. "Hey," he said softly, closing the door behind him. "Shikamaru said you wanted to talk." "I do," she replied, and her voice carried a tremor that made his heart skip. "Naruto-kun, do you remember what we discussed last year? About the future, about what kind of legacy we wanted to leave?" "Of course." He moved to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. "We talked about building something that would last beyond us, about making sure the next generation would inherit a better world than the one we grew up in." Hinata smiled, and the expression was radiant enough to light up the room. "Well, it looks like we're going to have a chance to do that more directly than we thought." It took him a moment to process what she was saying. When understanding hit, his eyes went wide. "You mean, I'm pregnant," she said simply. "About 8 weeks along, according to Dr. Sakura's analysis." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Naruto stared at his wife, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what she just told him. A child. His child, a new life that would grow up in this transformed world, inheriting both human potential and whatever cosmic legacy his transformation had created. How are you feeling about this?" he asked carefully, still holding her hand. "Terrified," she admitted with a laugh that was half joy, half panic, but also excited. "And curious about what kind of person they'll become, growing up in a universe where humans work alongside entities that can reshape stars." Naruto felt something warm and bright ignite in his chest, not the cosmic power he'd once wielded, but something infinitely more precious. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. "We're going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "We are," she confirmed. "The question is, what kind of parents do we want to be? What kind of world do we want to raise them in?" Before he could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the Nexus. Not the sharp, urgent sound of immediate danger, but the deeper, more complex harmonics that indicated a dimensional anomaly requiring immediate attention. Naruto and Hinata exchanged a look that spoke of years of shared experience with cosmic crises, then hurried toward the command center. What they found there was chaos, but the organized kind that came from dealing with impossible situations on a regular basis. Holographic displays showed readings from sensors scattered across 3 dimensions, while communication arrays buzzed with reports from monitoring stations throughout the solar system. "What's the situation?" Naruto asked as he entered the command center. "Unknown entity approaching from outside our local galaxy cluster," Sasuke reported from his position at the primary tactical station. His own transformation over the years had been less dramatic than Naruto's, but no less significant. Where once he'd sought power for revenge, now he'd found purpose in protection. It's massive, moving faster than should be physically possible, and it's sending out some kind of signal on frequencies we've never encountered before. "Hostile?" Naruto asked, though he was already reaching out with his enhanced senses to assess the situation. "Unknown, the signal is complex mathematical patterns mixed with what might be linguistic structures, but here's the interesting part." Sasuke gestured, and the holographic display zoomed in to show energy patterns that made Naruto's breath catch. "That's not entirely alien," he realized. "There's something familiar in those harmonics." "That's what we thought too," came a new voice from the command center's entrance. Mamashiki floated into the room, his transformed nature allowing him to exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions where physical movement wasn't required. "The signal carries traces of power signatures we recognize, ancient ones." "How ancient?" Hinata asked, her analytical mind already working through the implications. "Pre-galactic," Kaguya said, materializing beside them with the casual ease of someone who'd mastered dimensional travel. "From the time before the current universe achieved its stable configuration. We're talking about entities that witnessed the formation of the first stars." The weight of that statement settled over the command center like a physical presence. Even after years of dealing with cosmic-scale threats, the idea of something that old approaching their system was intimidating. "ETA?" Naruto asked. "At current velocity, approximately 72 hours, Sasuke replied, but if it can manipulate space-time the way our sensors suggest. It could be here in minutes if it wanted to be, Naruto finished. So why is it taking its time? The answer came in the form of a new signal, this one transmitted directly to the Nexus on frequencies that bypassed their communication arrays entirely. When it resolved into recognizable patterns, the message it contained made everyone in the command center go very still. Greetings, Bridge of Worlds. We are the gardeners, shepherds of cosmic evolution, watchers of the great cycles that shape reality itself. We have observed your transformation, your choice to transcend inherited limitation in favor of chosen purpose. We come not as judges or conquerors, but as curious colleagues. The voice carried harmonics that spoke of unimaginable age and vast intelligence, but also something that might have been genuine interest rather than threat. Your species has achieved something unprecedented. The synthesis of cosmic power with conscious choice, the integration of individual will with universal responsibility. We would speak with you, learn from you, perhaps share knowledge that could benefit both our peoples. It's a first contact scenario, Shikamaru observed with the tone of someone who'd grown used to impossible diplomatic situations. But not the kind we usually deal with. They're approaching us as equals, not as primitives to be studied or threats to be neutralized. Naruto felt something stir in his chest, not power in the cosmic sense, but the deeper force that had defined him since giving up his inherited legacies. The ability to choose hope over fear, to look at any situation and ask, how can this be better? Send a response, he said. Tell them they're welcome to approach for peaceful contact. And tell them, he paused, thinking about the child Hinata carried, about the world they were trying to build for the next generation. Tell them we're honored by their interest, and we look forward to learning what they can teach us about the universe we're all sharing. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Not for war, the gardener's approach carried none of the aggressive energy that had marked previous cosmic encounters. Instead, Earth's defenders found themselves preparing for something far more challenging. A first contact scenario where they were being treated as genuine equals by entities that predated most of galactic civilization. When the Gardener vessel finally arrived, it defied every expectation Naruto had developed about cosmic entities and their technology. Instead of the imposing geometries favored by the Otsutsuki or the reality-warping constructs of the Arbiters, the Gardener ship looked almost organic. It resembled a vast tree whose branches reached across dimensions, its leaves existing in spaces where normal matter couldn't survive. The beings who emerged from it were equally unexpected. Rather than the imposing forms of cosmic predators or the abstract geometries of universal forces, the Gardeners appeared almost humble. They were tall and slender, with features that suggested plant-like evolution, and they moved with the careful grace of entities who understood that their very presence could be overwhelming to younger species. "We greet you, Naruto Uzumaki, Bridge of Worlds," their leader said. Its communication carried through harmonic vibrations that somehow translated directly into meaning. "I am called Verdant Growth Through Starlight, though your linguistic patterns may render that as simply Verd. We have traveled far to meet the one who chose transcendence over power." "I'm honored by your interest," Naruto replied, finding himself oddly at ease despite the cosmic scope of the encounter. "Though I have to ask, why now? Why travel so far just to meet us?" "Because you represent something we have been seeking for eons," Verd explained. "A species that achieved cosmic awareness without losing its essential nature. Most civilizations that reach your current level either become consumed by their power or retreat into isolation to avoid the responsibilities that power brings. You have chosen a third path." Over the days that followed, the cultural exchange that developed between Earth and the Gardeners revealed depths of possibility that none of them had imagined. The ancient beings shared knowledge of cosmic cycles that spanned billions of years, techniques for nurturing life that could transform barren worlds into gardens, and philosophical frameworks for understanding consciousness itself. In return, the humans and their allies offered something the Gardeners had never encountered: the perspective of beings who had chosen to remain fundamentally themselves despite gaining access to cosmic power. The ability to see universal challenges through the lens of personal relationships and individual choice. "Your approach to dimensional bridge building is unusual," Verd observed during one of their technical exchanges. "Most species that master such techniques treat the process as a purely mechanical manipulation of space-time. You approach it as if you were introducing friends who have never met." "Because that's basically what we're doing," Naruto explained, gesturing toward a holographic display that showed the current network of dimensional bridges connecting Earth to 17 different worlds. Each species has something unique to offer. Each world has its own perspective on how to approach universal challenges. Our job isn't to control those connections, it's to help them discover what they have in common. And this philosophy extends to your approach to conflict resolution as well. Another gardener, one whose name translated roughly as patience that nurtures understanding, added, "We have observed your mediation of the Centauri territorial dispute. Rather than imposing a solution based on superior power, you helped both sides discover alternatives that neither had previously considered." "That's what being human means," Hinata said, her hand resting unconsciously on her still flat stomach. "We don't have the luxury of cosmic perspective or eons of experience. We have to figure things out as we go, and the only way to do that successfully is to listen to each other and try to find solutions that work for everyone." The conversation was interrupted by Sasuke's urgent call from the command center. When they arrived, they found him studying sensor readings that showed familiar but unwelcome energy signatures approaching from the outer system. "Rogue Otsutsuki," he reported grimly. "A faction that rejected the transformation the main clan underwent. They're calling themselves the Purists, and they're not here for peaceful contact." The approaching force was substantial, a dozen vessels carrying entities that radiated the old hunger, the endless appetite for power that had once defined the entire Otsutsuki species. But they weren't the most dangerous thing on the sensors. "They're not alone," Kaguya observed, her expression troubled. "There's something with them, something that feels like—" She paused, searching for words to describe an energy signature that defied easy categorization. "The Devourer's kin," Verd said quietly, its harmonics carrying something that might have been fear. "We had thought them all transformed or destroyed, but this one has rejected change, chosen stagnation over growth." "How dangerous are we talking about?" Naruto asked, though the answer was already becoming apparent as the approaching entity's power began to affect space-time around them. Stars in distant systems flickered as energy was drained across impossible distances to feed the rogue collective's approach. "Extremely. A Devourkin that has allied with Otsutsuki purists represents a combination of cosmic hunger and dimensional manipulation that could threaten entire galactic clusters." Naruto felt the familiar fire ignite in his chest, but this time it was tempered by new understanding. He was no longer the boy who had faced impossible challenges alone, no longer the cosmic entity who had transcended human limitations through inherited power. He was something else now. A bridge between worlds, a synthesis of human determination and universal responsibility, and he had responsibilities that extended far beyond just protecting Earth. "Then we stop them," he said simply. "All of us working together. You would risk everything to protect not just your world, but all the worlds they threaten?" Verd asked. Naruto looked around the command center, at Sasuke and Hinata, at Kaguya and the transformed Otsutsuki, at the gardener representatives who had come so far seeking understanding rather than conquest, at all the connections that had grown between species who had once been strangers or enemies. "That's what being a bridge means," he said. "You don't just connect two sides. You take responsibility for protecting the whole structure." As alarms began blaring throughout the nexus and defensive systems across 3 dimensions powered up for the coming battle, Naruto placed his hand on Hinata's stomach and felt the flutter of new life growing there. The next generation was coming, and he was going to make sure they inherited a universe worth living in. The real war for the soul of cosmic civilization was about to begin. But for the first time in his life, Naruto felt truly ready for whatever came next. Not because he had power, but because he had purpose. Not because he was strong enough to face it alone, but because he wasn't alone at all. The age of isolation was ending. The age of connection, with all its challenges and infinite possibilities, had begun. And somewhere in the space between heartbeats, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what these unlikely allies might accomplish together. The final battle didn't happen the way anyone expected. When the rogue Otsutsuki fleet finally reached Earth's defensive perimeter, they came not with the calculated precision of cosmic predators, but with the desperate fury of entities facing extinction. Their alliance with the Devourkin had transformed them into something worse than either species alone, beings that consumed not just energy or matter, but the very concept of growth and change itself. Naruto stood at the center of the Nexus command deck, surrounded by allies from 17 different worlds, all united by something that would have been impossible just a decade ago. The shared understanding that some things were worth protecting regardless of species or origin. "They're not just trying to harvest worlds anymore," Sasuke reported, his evolved perception tracking energy patterns that normal sensors couldn't detect. They're trying to freeze the entire local galactic cluster in temporal stasis. If they succeed, nothing will ever change again. No growth, no evolution, no new possibilities. A universe of eternal hunger, Kaguya added grimly, where they can feed forever without their prey ever truly dying or adapting. This is beyond mere conquest, Verd observed, the gardener's harmonics carrying something that might have been horror. They seek to unmake the fundamental principle that drives all existence, the capacity for transformation. Naruto felt something cold settle in his stomach. The approaching force wasn't just threatening Earth or even their local galactic community. They were threatening the basic right of every conscious being to choose who they wanted to become. Then we don't just stop them, he said quietly. We show them why that choice is worth preserving. The battle that followed wasn't fought with conventional weapons or even the reality-warping techniques that had defined previous cosmic conflicts. Instead, it became something unprecedented, a demonstration of what was possible when free will itself became a force of nature. The rogue Otsutsuki came at them with abilities that could freeze stars in their orbits, techniques that locked entire solar systems into unchanging loops of repetition. Where their power touched, growth stopped, evolution ceased, and the infinite possibilities of existence collapsed into single, predetermined outcomes. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed that power was the only thing that mattered. Naruto met their assault not with matching force, but with something they couldn't understand or counter, the simple choice to be different. Where their stasis fields tried to lock him into a single state, he chose to become something new with each heartbeat. Where their reality anchors attempted to prevent change, he demonstrated that change was not just possible, but inevitable when consciousness decided it wanted to grow. And he wasn't alone. The transformed Otsutsuki who had joined Earth's alliance showed their former kin what evolution beyond hunger could accomplish. The gardeners shared knowledge of growth patterns that transcended physical law. Even the reformed devourer from their previous encounter contributed its understanding of how transformation could be nourishment rather than destruction. But it was the human element, the messy, unpredictable, absolutely stubborn refusal to accept that any situation was hopeless, that ultimately turned the tide. You know what your problem is, Naruto called out to the leader of the rogue forces as reality warped and twisted around them both. You're so afraid of change that you've forgotten why you started wanting power in the first place. The entity he faced, something that might once have been called Kinryu, but had become so consumed by stasis hunger that its original identity was barely recognizable, paused in its assault. We seek permanence, stability, an end to the chaos of constant transformation. But that's not stability, Naruto replied, his voice carrying harmonics that made nearby spacetime sing with possibility. That's death. Real stability comes from being strong enough to handle whatever changes come your way. What happened next defied every law of physics that anyone present understood. Instead of attacking his enemy, Naruto chose to heal them. Not their bodies, entities at their level transcended such simple concepts, but the fundamental fear that had driven them to seek stasis in the first place. The technique he used didn't have a name because it had never existed before. It was part medical ninjutsu, part dimensional manipulation, part pure empathy given cosmic scale. Where it touched the rogue forces, it didn't impose change so much as it offered the choice to remember what they had been before hunger and fear consumed them. The effect was immediate and devastating to their formation. Across the fleet, beings who had spent eons fleeing from the possibility of transformation suddenly found themselves faced with memories of curiosity, wonder, and the simple joy of discovering something new. This is impossible, Kinryu breathed, its form beginning to shift as ancient patterns of growth reasserted themselves. We are beyond redemption. We chose stasis. We chose. You chose fear, Hinata said, appearing beside Naruto through techniques that bent spacetime around her growing connection to his transformed nature. But choice isn't a one-time thing. You get to choose again every moment of every day. Her presence on the battlefield should have been impossible. She was months into her pregnancy, and the cosmic forces at play could have unmade her at the molecular level. But somehow, impossibly, she was not only surviving but contributing to the healing wave that was spreading through the enemy fleet. The next generation, Naruto realized aloud, understanding flooding through him as he felt the life growing within her respond to the cosmic energies around them. It's not just my child, it's what they represent, the possibility that the future can be better than the past. The Devourakin that had allied with the rogues was the last to succumb to the transformation wave. Ancient beyond measure, it had forgotten that existence could be anything other than endless consumption. But when Naruto's healing technique reached it, carrying with it the combined will of billions of beings who had chosen growth over stagnation, even that primordial hunger began to shift. "We remember," it said, its voice carrying wonder that hadn't been heard since the universe was young. Before the hunger, before the fear, there was curiosity, the desire to understand rather than consume. When the battle ended, though ended wasn't quite the right word for what had happened, the local galactic cluster had been fundamentally changed. Not conquered or destroyed, but evolved. The fear-driven cycle of predator and prey that had dominated cosmic civilization for eons had been replaced by something unprecedented. A community of species united by shared choice rather than shared origin. "The reports are still coming in," Shikamaru said 3 days later as they stood in the observation lounge of the rebuilt Nexus. 17 different galactic arms are reporting similar transformations. Species that had been locked in eternal warfare for millennia suddenly finding common ground. Civilizations that had never made contact before reaching out to share knowledge and resources. "It's spreading," Sasuke observed with something that might have been awe. "The choice to be different, to grow instead of stagnate, it's becoming contagious." Naruto nodded, his hand resting gently on Hinata's now visible pregnancy. Through their bond and his evolved connection to cosmic forces, he could sense the life growing within her, not just his child, but something more. A synthesis of human determination and cosmic potential that represented everything they had fought to preserve. "What will you call them?" Kaguya asked, her pale eyes soft with something that might have been maternal instinct. "We've been thinking about that," Hinata said, her voice warm with anticipation. "If it's a boy, we thought Asura. Not after the ancient Asura, but as a promise that this child will have the choice to become whoever they want to be. And if it's a girl, Tsuki," Naruto said with a smile. "Moon. Because she'll represent the light that guides people through darkness, just like the moon has always done for Earth." 5 years passed in what felt like a blink of cosmic time. Naruto stood in the training grounds of the new Konoha Academy, a facility that existed simultaneously on Earth and in 3 other dimensions, allowing students from dozens of species to learn together. Around him, the latest generation of what people had started calling bridge builders practiced techniques that would have been impossible before the Great Transformation. His own children were among them. Asura, now 4 years old, demonstrated an intuitive understanding of dimensional mechanics that made his teachers shake their heads in wonder. Little Tsuki, barely 2, had already shown the ability to perceive across multiple realities simultaneously, though she mostly used this cosmic awareness to find the best hiding spots during games of peekaboo. "The delegation from the Andromeda Collective is requesting a cultural exchange program," Hinata reported, approaching with the kind of diplomatic scroll that had once represented impossible dreams and now arrived with routine frequency. "They want to learn about Earth's choice-based philosophy and share their advances in temporal cultivation." "Schedule it for next month," Naruto said, watching as one of his students, a young crystalline entity from the vegan system, successfully created a stable portal between dimensions. "But make sure to include the Otsutsuki Council in the discussions. Their understanding of cosmic mechanics will be valuable for the temporal work." It still amazed him sometimes how naturally the impossible had become routine. The universe was vast beyond imagination, filled with wonders and challenges that no single species could face alone. But when conscious beings chose cooperation over conquest, when they decided that growth was more important than power, even cosmic-scale problems became manageable. "Papa, look," Asura called out, his young voice bright with excitement. "I figured out how to make the chakra sing." Naruto turned to see his son standing in the center of a complex geometric pattern, his small hands weaving signs that created harmonies in the local space-time continuum. The technique was purely his own creation, not inherited from ancient legacies or learned from cosmic entities, but discovered through the simple process of curiosity and experimentation. "That's incredible, kiddo," Naruto said, kneeling down to his son's level. "But remember what we talked about. Power isn't about what you can do, it's about what you choose to do with what you can do." "I know, Papa," Asura said seriously. "I want to use it to help people just like you do." "And what if you change your mind someday?" Naruto asked. "What if you decide you want to be something completely different?" Asura considered this with the gravity that children brought to important questions. "Then I choose something different," he said finally. "That's what choice means, right?" "That's exactly what it means," Naruto confirmed, pulling his son into a hug that somehow managed to encompass not just the boy but the infinite possibilities that stretched out before him. Later that evening, as Earth's sun set and the transformed moon rose to cast silver light across the academy grounds, Naruto found himself standing where this whole journey had begun, looking up at the night sky with wonder at the vast universe that stretched beyond the limits of perception. But now, instead of feeling small or insignificant in the face of cosmic immensity, he felt connected to it all. Not as some chosen one or inherited legacy, but as a conscious being who had made the choice to reach out rather than turn inward, to build bridges rather than walls. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Hinata asked, joining him at the observation platform. "Just thinking about the future," he replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "About what kind of universe our kids are going to inherit. A better one than we got," she said with quiet confidence. "That's all any generation can really do, leave things a little better than they found them." Naruto nodded, feeling the truth of that statement settle into his bones. He wasn't the reincarnation of ancient powers anymore. He wasn't some cosmic anomaly or bridge between worlds. He was just Naruto Uzumaki, husband, father, teacher, and guardian of the simple but revolutionary idea that conscious beings could choose to be better than they were. Above them, the moon shone with its ancient light, but now it carried new meaning. Not the cold radiance of isolated observation, but the warm glow of connection across impossible distances. A reminder that even in the vast darkness between stars, there were always points of light calling out to each other. And in the space between heartbeats, in the pause between one moment and the next, the universe itself seemed to whisper a promise. This was just the beginning. Somewhere in distant galaxies, young beings were looking up at their own night skies and wondering what lay beyond the edge of sight. Somewhere, species that had never imagined life beyond their own worlds were taking their first tentative steps toward the stars. Somewhere, the next generation of bridge builders was being born, carrying within them the potential to solve problems that hadn't even been imagined yet. The age of isolation was over. The age of infinite possibility had begun. And at the center of it all, a boy who had once been told he would never amount to anything stood with his family and watched the universe stretch out before them like an ocean of light, knowing that the most important journeys were the ones you chose to take together. The real story, Naruto realized with a smile, was just beginning. What a ride, right? From that kid everyone ignored to literally teaching ancient cosmic entities about the power of choice. Naruto went from eating expired milk to raising children who casually bend spacetime during family game night. Which moment hit you hardest? The first reality crack against Neji, that insane pain fight where gravity became his playground, or maybe when he chose healing over godhood? Drop your thoughts below. Subscribe for more what if insanity and tell me what wild scenarios you want explored next. Catch you in the next one.